Yes, that's right. It is another slow chat, this time with none other than Senator Alex. I'm going to say Antic. I meant to ask him, is it Antic or Antich? I will clarify that point as soon as we do get him on. But you know what? There's a couple of things I've got to do first. I've got to say, number one, thank you to Brew Australia, brewaustralia.com, for supporting this channel. It is my business. And every time you drink a brew, cup of coffee, which this is actually tea because it's late at night and who wants caffeine right now, or at least not that much caffeine. But every time you drink a brew, you are supporting my work. So brewaustralia.com. The other thing I want to say thank you to, and I say thing rather than person deliberately, are my trolls, because they are out in force tonight. They are feeding the YouTube algorithm, and I'm incredibly grateful. I just want to bring up some of the greatest hits already. Like, this started more than an hour before the slow chat started. The trolls were in on YouTube, and it's brilliant. It's hilarious to me because they are so bad at what they do. And I'm like, guys, is this your best work? Is this how you want to live your, like, I get it. If the most meaningful thing that you could do for the advancement of mankind is ride on my coattails and try and like get a bit of attention at the very background of what I do, then if that's your pinnacle, if that's your peak, you know what? Good for you. That's a bit sad, but good for you, right? At least you're doing your best. But could you take some pride in your work, please? I'm going to give you some examples. So here we have a YouTube commenter, Anna Borschen. Oh, so clever. Hi, Topher. Do you know anything about how liberalism is anti-Australian? Yes, I do. Actually, I'm assuming you're talking about the American definition of liberalism. Most people, if they're talking about classic liberalism, would call it classic liberalism. So I'm assuming you mean sort of leftism, American Democrat kind of stuff. Yes, I do. Listen, Gopher, we can't agree to liberalism as Australians. Liberalism is anti-Australian. What's wrong with you? You go on about how smart you are. Well, that's interesting. I think you're going to have a hard time finding me ever claiming to be smart. Secondly, you're not going to have me ever claiming to be a liberal unless it's a classical liberal. So that's kind of weird. And clearly this person hasn't put a lot of work in. But here's the funny switch that happens. And this is where I want you to pay attention, because all of a sudden the name changes. We go from Anna Borschen to Wasp. Topher, what does your conscience say about liberalism? Don't you feel like leftism is exploitative? Oh, wait, do you count yourself as a leftist? Lol. Funny how the name changes, but the words are exactly the same. Now, this is sequential, by the way. I'm going through all of these sequentially. And then the name changes again. Sophie Scholl, how dare you disrespect a real historical figure by taking her name for the sake of your trolling? I think that's fucking low. Now, Antic, dressed in a douche suit. It's like how they've forced the lowest of intellect in Dayglow orange. Wow, there's a lot of low stuff going on there, buddy. But he then says, or she or whoever, it's not possible to trust creeps in suits. They wear suits to impress creeps. Actually, they wear suits because they work in professional environments, but that's another story. But watch again the name change from Sophie Scholl to Penny Pustulas. I'm so glad I don't live in a douche world where suits matter. Funny how the name changed, but the content remained exactly the same. Listen, mate, I get it. You're a troll and you don't have any friends in the entire world. You use multiple accounts to make it feel like you actually have some support for your crazy, weird ideas. I get it. You're lonely. You do what you have to do, buddy. But could you please take a little bit of pride in your work and actually put in some effort to create the different characters and have them say different things? Because when they're all banging on about the same stuff, it's transparent. It's obvious. Right, so there's a few others in there as well. I'm not going to dignify any more of them with a response. There's been heaps of great content, heaps of great comments already. Good on you, Topher, for calling out the dumb trolls. It's the dumb that bothers me. Trolling's fine. I've got no problem with it. Just be clever. Be original. Do something that I haven't seen before. Please, for the love of all that is good on God's green earth, do something original. Trolls, so much fun. They do provide a service to mankind. They feed the algorithm. Okay, I think I've vented enough for the start of one day. I know people are going to ask, I will be smoking the Mi Querida Anco Corto. No, I'm not going to tell you about it. If you want to learn about cigars, you need to watch The Cigar Professor. I'm smoking a mug of black tea. I have 3 different whiskeys to choose from. I'm going to light up the cigar and then decide which whiskey I want based on the flavor profile of the cigar. And we're going to go from there. My guest tonight is Senator Alex, and I'm going to get clarification on the pronunciation of his last name in just a moment. Thank you so much for joining me. We've already got over 300 people watching. We're probably going to have a lot more than that by the end of tonight. It's going to be a really good night. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'm just going to call you Senator Alex for the moment. Can you definitively tell me once and for all, how should your last name be pronounced correctly? Not the Australianification, correctly.
Yeah, well, Topher, it's great to be here. And by the way, some of your trolls are extraordinary. I mean, it's the fumes from Mum's basement that's getting. I can feel it. It's getting to them. It's getting to them, and it's hurting their intellect. I mean, it is tragic, isn't it, when you read stuff like that and people think that's clever? Anyway. And look, by the way, just for the trolls out there, I love it. I love it. Give me more. I can't get enough trolls. That's the thing that upsets me the most. So if you're out there and you want to troll, please, somebody troll me. Won't take long. Anyway, back to the first question. Look, I answer to anything, a whole range of names. I think, to be clear, it's probably Antic to be correct, but we always said Antic, so I usually go by Antic. So you're right. There you go.
Yeah.
You're winning on every front.
You've made me feel good about my confusion. You've made me feel a lot less bad. Now, there is something that I do have to address. I did a little bit of research, did a little bit of backgrounding. I read your Wikipedia page. That's how committed I am to my job. I read one, Wikipedia page. And I have to say, how does it feel being kind of the family disappointment? I think this is probably my first question for you, is how do you psychologically endure the disappointment that your family must feel? And for those that don't know Alex's backstory, Alex's dad is a very well-regarded medical professional. He's actually a head of sleep sort of specialty stuff. I don't even know how to say it. I'm very grateful for that, because I actually myself, I have sleep apnea, and I've needed professionals in that regard in the past. So I've got a lot of respect for your dad. How did your dad cope? I mean, your whole family, how did they cope when you said you wanted to study law? How did they deal with that disappointment?
Well, I mean, you got to understand that was in my mid-20s, or probably early 20s, I suppose.
You were young and dumb. You were young and dumb. I get it.
I was young and dumb, and they'd had a lot of practice at being disappointed in me. So, so it's there we go. That's good. I saw one about being a Satanist. That's not true.
Yeah. They'll all come through. Don't you worry about that.
There he goes. He sits. Yeah. He sits on behalf of the board. He's good. So look, they'd had a lot of practice, a lot of a run up in being disappointed, and I guess it just rolled into another layer of disappointment. So, here we go. And I spent 20 years as a lawyer, so they had a bit of practice.
But I mean, it's sort of adding insult to injury, isn't it? When you then go, you know what, I'm going to leave. What is it? One of the 3 least trusted professions in Australia, being a lawyer. It's one of the lowest trust professions of all. And then you're going to leave that to become a politician. It just seems like a sideways move.
Creeping up the tree of most hated professions until pretty soon I'm going to go for the top, which is an SA health bureaucrat. So that's next. That's next. So I'm looking forward to that.
I look, family matters aside, I have been enjoying the show, as you have been in the Senate, and it's so refreshing. It is so jolly refreshing to have someone in the Senate who is saying stuff that's not politically correct. You are challenging the orthodoxy on whether it's net zero, whether it was lockdowns, whether it's mandatory vaccinations, etc. You've been willing to say what so many of us have been thinking, but we don't have that platform and we don't have that voice. What's that experience like? Because your party, and I know that you will defend your party and you have to defend your party, but even within your party, I think it's fair to say that you're an outlier. So what's that experience like as an outlier in that position?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of wriggle room. You got to understand. I mean, there are people that have their own views inside our party, and they do, and they share them. But I think it probably in the last 12 months, there were some contentious things, mainly the sort of the mandates and other stuff where it really became a bit obvious. But not that I think there'd be a huge amount of disagreement, but I think look. The reality is, Parliament's a privilege. It's a rare privilege to be there, and it's not lost on me. I just sort of take the view that if every time I'm given the opportunity to speak, I'll speak about something that's actually I'm hearing on the outside world. One of my great fears about politics is that it's a bit of a bubble, and you walk into that building any given morning and it feels like you're not quite, it's like you're switched off into a different world for a little while. And that's because it's a process, it's a job, it's a workplace. It's not necessarily a criticism, but when I talk to people, they're not talking about the voice, and they're actually not talking about net zero. They're not talking about, a federal ICAC and all this sort of stuff. They're talking about, why I'm losing my job because, I say no to a medical procedure. They're talking about cost of living. They're talking about worry about their families and what their kids are being taught at school. So, there are many jobs you can do in life, and there's lots of time to do other things. But if you're given the privilege of being in Parliament, then surely you've got to have a crack. And I just think, that's what I'll do. I'll keep doing it, and hopefully I'm touching a nerve with people out there, because ultimately I think it's been a pretty dark time over the last couple of years, and we've all felt the need to shout a bit, and hopefully I'm doing that for people as well.
Mm. Well, look, I've certainly felt the need to shout here in Victoria, mostly on Victorian politics, but some federal as well. One of the concerns that I know I hold, and there's even comments already here. I'll see if I can dig one up. That sort of no, that's not one. There were okay. Well, I mean, there's lots of supportive comments. I'm just trying to find. There was one that I read just for a second ago, just to do with yeah. Okay, so Glenn Hennessy. All right, this is Glenn is touching on a really great issue here.
Yeah.
I'm full disclosure. I'm a financial member of the Liberal Democrats. They're a different party to the Liberal Party. Obviously, Alex Antic, you are a elected senator for the Liberal Party federally.
Yeah.
So we're on opposite sides of the fence here. But there is this sort of tension where I've heard many a person argue that people like myself, believers in freedom, we want to stand for human rights, we want to stand for freedom, we want less government, we want less taxes. I align very closely with what Robert Menzies expressed in his founding speech when he actually founded the Liberal. I align very close, not perfectly, but very closely with that.
Yep.
But that's not what I've seen. It's not what I saw from the Federal Liberal Party during COVID either, if I'm completely honest. What we saw with restrictions locking Australians out of Australia, sort of tacitly aiding and abetting vaccine mandates and other things. I know we could debate the specifics on that, but that's certainly what it felt like to me, was that they were tacitly aiding and abetting a lot of that. People ask me, is the Liberal Party worth saving? People talk about trying to, change it from the inside, become a member, start voting in primaries, maybe run, whatever it may be, try and change it from the inside, versus the Liberal Party's a lost cause. Let's just go and start an alternative. I obviously have my perspective on that. You're going to have yours. Why did you, as someone who wanted to make a difference and do good for the world, why did you choose the Liberal Party as the vehicle through which to do that?
Yeah, look, I mean, they're all good questions, and the reason is because it aligns with what I believe in, and I think it would with a lot of people who are listening tonight and watching tonight. If you go back and you look at the various foundational documents in the various constitutions, the We Believe statement, the values are really, really solid, and the party's platform is really, really solid. It talks about being anti-communist, freedom of speech, standing for freedom of association, freedom of religion. You name it. It talks about all of that. A welfare net for people in need, all the sort of stuff you'd expect. And I guess that gets bandied around a lot. What I'm most interested in, I guess, is making sure that we've got a party that actually does live up to those values. And I think that's where the rails come off. Sometimes people get confused by what's the basis of the party's platform, as opposed to, is it always being prosecuted? Now, I unashamedly would say that I think there have been times in the last 12 months, 18 months where things that we could have done, we didn't do. That was the very basis of the stand that myself and Gerard Rennick took on the mandates, where we said, look, we're not going to support the government's agenda until we get back on the rails on this. And it didn't go down well. Let's be honest, it wouldn't. But the whole point of the exercise is a bit like Robert Menzies did in the 40s, where he took all of the non-Labor parties and he said, all right, I need all of you back in the tent because, if you're a patriot or a libertarian or a conservative, a religious person, whatever it might be, we're better together than we are apart. I think that's what we've seen over the years. I think we've seen a drift of people out of the Liberal Party into, other the Liberal Democrats or United Australia, whatever it may be. I think we're better off together. And I think from where I sit, I want to bring Liberals back to the Liberal Party. I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe in the party. And if I thought it was a lost cause, I certainly wouldn't be here. And I think it's far from it. I think we're going to see a period of time now where the pendulum comes back to the original values, the values of Menzies, despite what, some of the, old guard might think about where Menzies stood. He was a conservative. He was a libertarian. He was all of the above, and that's why the Liberal Party is what it is. And so what I'm hoping to do is try to encourage people to come with us. Come with me. As you say, if you're involved in politics, if you're a member of a political party, you get the opportunity to either stand yourself and bring those values to Parliament, because often the hardest battle is the pre-selection battle, let's be honest, in some sense.
Sure.
Or or support people that do. And in the last angle to that is having the opportunity to influence policy inside the party. The more conservatives, libertarians, patriots, and religious types that drift off into the distance, the more the party will, I think, or more apolitical party will drift back towards the left. So the worst thing people can do is move away, in my view. The best thing you can do because ultimately, Topher, the other thing to bear in mind is this, and this is no criticism of the minor parties. I think there's a lot of good work that gets done and all that sort of stuff. But ultimately, politics is a bit like a game of footy. There's only ever two teams on the field, red and blue, parties of government, and ensuring that the Liberal Party is a strong conservative party that stands for our values will ensure that we get the best run up at policy, at good policy. And I just should say, I think we're going to start to see more and more of that. I was really encouraged by some of the stuff that Peter Dutton, said the other day about radical gender theory in schools and all that sort of stuff. So stay tuned.
Look, there's some very mixed reviews coming through in the comments here, but that's to be expected. These are contentious issues, and this is a contentious time. And this is what I love about slow chats. We're not here on a schedule. I'm not looking for a soundbite. There's no gotcha journalism here. I just want to actually talk to Alex and really dive into some of these issues. And Alex has been gracious enough to give us, more of his time than Alex you would give to most news outlets. So thank you for that. I'd say it's a huge compliment. And has also made a commitment to just be simply frank and forthright and actually just talk honestly on all these issues. Yeah. So I do want to dive a bit deeper into this before we move on, though, because I'm not going to name names, but I've personally known two different individuals who are now elected representatives of the Liberal Party at some level. I'm not going to say federal, state, or which state or anything like that, but they are now elected representatives. And within only months of them becoming elected representatives, I came across things that they wrote or said that I know they didn't believe prior to their election. And these were in areas where I have expertise. Again, I'm trying not to give away anything that could actually allow anyone to figure out who I'm talking about. But these are areas where I have expertise. And I know that what they said in public as a representative of their respective seat, not even necessarily government, but as an elected MP, was incorrect. And I'm fairly sure they knew it. So I'm very, very curious, Alex. I talk a lot about perverse incentives in politics. You mentioned the bubble a moment ago. Mm-hmm. How does a good person, because these were good people, they walk into that situation, they get that election. What happens to people? Because we've all seen it.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, we're talking about individual cases, and I don't know, but look, I think there is a lot of pressure on the individual to stay, inside the formation, and that's certainly the case for the Labor Party. That's why you can never, ever, ever expect that the Labor Party would ever take us out of these sort of times, despite the frustration that people have felt over the last period. That's why really only, in my view, a strong, conservative Liberal Party that sort of stands for our values is the only one that can really do it. But you do see instances where people get in and sort of look around and say, "Oh, this is a bit comfortable. Maybe I'll just toe the line." I think part of the problem is this: we've got to attract people from outside the political bubble. So what I mean by that is, it was years ago where the Labor Party was almost the butt of our jokes because they would bring people from the trade union movement, and they'd often go and work for a member of parliament. And when they did that, they'd be lined up, they'd have proven their worth, and they'd be lined up for a seat in parliament, federal, state, whatever. They'd do 2 terms, they'd be moved on, and then they go off and become a lobbyist. And Bob Hawke talked about it. He said that this is not good for us because we're just getting a political class. We're getting a professional political class. As the years went on, politics became so professionalised that all sides of politics started doing it. So now
I was going to challenge you if I can jump. I was going to challenge you if you hadn't brought up the fact that all sides got involved. That on the Liberal side, it wasn't the unions, but it was being a staffer. If you did 2 terms as a staffer, you were pretty much a shoo-in for pre-election, and it became the same thing in a different form.
I think, and so this is one of the theories I've got about politics. Is at the moment is what we're seeing now is that the political class becoming. There you go. The political class. It's just one for the crowd. The political class becoming a professional class. Whereas in years gone by, it was meant to be something that people did perhaps at the end of their careers or somewhere through the public service. Because we do see that now. We see reams of political staffers, many of them very good people, many of them very capable people, going straight from a political office to working a local branch, an FEC or whatever you'd call it, and then they just go into politics, and then they do that for 2 terms, and they go off and become a lobbyist. So none of that sounds instinctively bad to the outsider, but in actual fact, what it does is create the swamp, and people don't have a profession to fall back on, and therefore I think are risk averse. And for someone like me, I've got a career. And so whatever happens, I'll go back and do that or something, who knows, something else. But for me to stand up and say, I don't agree with this, I don't like it, this is what they're telling me out in the real world, and this is what we need to be talking about in here, is I think less of a risk because of the 20-something years I had in the private sector prior to.
Sure.
I mean, presumably I won't get cancelled. Presumably I'm still employable. Who knows? But,
good luck.
but I've got more of a chance than if all you know is politics. You don't rock the boat. And you see, having had Bob Hawke lament that, we had Prime Minister Howard, who then said the same thing a few years later about the Liberal Party. We can't allow politics to continue on to that. So my view is the best thing we can do in order to ensure that we get people with a background. There are lots of good people out there. The trick is that it's very hard to crack that political bubble to get involved if you don't know the game. And political professionals know the game. So what I want to be able to do, with support from people that come on board, join with us, is pave the way for other people to come on board in the colour blue, standing for our values without fear or favour. And we can get that return to politics where it was, the ophthalmologist that took time out, or anyone who had a political career, or the farmer, or, the local business owner, or whoever it might be, a mum that had stayed home for years. Who knows? Who cares? As long as you will not back down and you stand for our values, the collective of all of that in the one party saves the day, in my view. So that's the challenge. It's a fairly big one, by the way. But, I should also just add to that, just so I'm not misquoted on that, there are lots of good people still inside the organisation now. Lots of people. Not everybody has to be a spear thrower, and you have to understand that there are a lot of people doing good work in different ways, sometimes quieter ways than someone like me, but everyone plays their role.
Yeah, well, this is one of the things that I was actually going to talk about a little bit later, but I might as well, you've sort of segued to it beautifully now. The fact is that each of us that love freedom, that want to see more freedom and more individual personal responsibility and personal freedom, lower taxes, less regulation, less red tape, these sorts of ideas, more freedom of speech, etc. We each need to play our role as we best understand that to be. And for someone like myself, I've dabbled in politics. I've been asked to run for politics time and time again. I finally said yes at the federal election. In hindsight, I don't think that was the right decision. I was right the first time when I said no over and over and over again. And so I'm going to go back to saying no over and over and over again. That's not my sphere. My sphere is this, right? Your sphere is politics, because that's where you've now chosen to move into, and you've been successful in that. Others are fighting in the legal sense. Others are just simply fighting just in that very humble sort of home sense, raising kids, having families, making sure that their families are going to be okay, and that they can make their own choices free of the influence of government, etc. We're all fighting in our own ways.
Correct.
What do you believe can be achieved by someone in your position? Obviously, I've done slow chats with a lot of different crossbench senators, that sort of thing. And their situation is very particular. Often they can consult or they can influence the legislation, but it's very rare that they actually get to decide what passes and what doesn't, right? They're in a very particular situation. You are a senator with a party that until recently was in government. The most recent election didn't go your way. You're now in opposition federally. What are the levers that you've got at your disposal to actually make a difference as an elected senator in both contexts, in government and now in opposition?
There's just a host of really good and interesting questions in there. And I'll start with that first one, because it was the last cab off the rank. For people like me, I've thought about this long and hard. And for the last 2 years, I think it's been frustrating, because we've had this period where we've all tried everything, I think, in many sense. I mean, to the point of doing what Gerard Rennick and I did, which was, I think, saying to the government, we're not going to stand with you. We're going to do our own thing until we give some help to people out there. That was probably the parachute string for me. There wasn't anything else that I could do. I came to the conclusion the best thing that I could do, and this is not the only thing, but the best thing I could do is continue to be a mouthpiece for these issues. So, we get people coming all the time saying, this is what's happened. This is what, this is what I'm seeing. This is what so giving a voice to that is very, very important. Having said that, the other thing I think that's critical in all of this is by speaking this language inside the Liberal Party, I'm hoping that I can show others around me, that there is a way to come. We can pull the party back to some of the values that I don't know if we lost, but perhaps we didn't champion as much as we should have in the last little period. And doing that internally as well.
I have my own thoughts on that, but I'll bite my tongue for a moment.
Yeah. So I thought you might say that. But in any event, having the ability to be able to pull the party, and show the way in some of the things that perhaps get glossed over because of whatever reason, I think is really, really important too. The other thing that I think someone like me can do is do the work that I'm doing, and that is show people that it's still a home for people that have all of those things we talked about: patriotic, libertarian, conservative, and even potentially religious views, whatever it might be. You've got a home here, and we're better together than we are apart. So there's a political role there as well. But so there's heaps of things. And the thing that you said, I think off the bat on this question was everyone plays their role. I mean,
sure.
I haven't thought about it since, I've got to admit, but now that you've said it, it reminds me of a time a little bit, maybe 18 months ago, where I said to myself, everyone's going to play their role in this little period. We all went through this exercise 2 years ago, 18 months ago, where we said something's not right. Like something is dead set not right. What do I do about it? Now, that's no different to, someone down the road running a shop. There were lots of people that ran shops that said, I'm not going to force people to wear a mask. There were heaps. There were business owners that said, I'm not going to force someone to take a medical treatment that they don't want. Now, there were many that didn't, but there were many that played their role and did the right thing and said, if you want to work for me, you don't have to. You can make your own decisions up, which was fair.
It was a new version of "Don't Ask, Don't Tell."
Yeah, well, it was because you had all these different things. So there were lots of people doing lots of different things. It just so happened that my time in Parliament, the privilege that's been afforded to me, meant that I had a bigger microphone than everyone else. So it became very clear early on in the pandemic. I've got to do something. I've got to say something. Because I just happened to be in the musical chair that is politics at the moment. Everyone was doing their bit. So, I think you can't underestimate the fact that politics is critical, right? So my strongly held view is by getting Liberals back to the Liberal Party, in a sense, which is the way I've been talking about it, that's one facet of it. But what we've seen over 30, 40 years or so is this long march through the institutions that's taken place. It's been slow, it's been steady. The left are now I often joke, they're not in the march. They're drinking whiskey and smoking cigars like you are at the end of the march. Like it's done. That's it. So we've now got to understand that it's not just a political solution. It's, well, if you're a doctor, why are you not with the AMA or, AMPS or someone or whoever in order to try and put your flag in the sand there and say, I stand for these values. I vote in AMA elections. The same with the various law societies across the country, your school board, your local council elections, whatever it is. I think people who are freedom-loving, libertarians, conservatives, whatever you want to call it, we've all been doing stuff, real stuff for the last 20, 30, 40 years. We've all been taking kids to school, working jobs, running businesses, and we've all taken our eye off the ball. And that's all of us, right? I'm not just putting the blame on everyone else. I'm saying all of us, we all did it. I say, and I've been saying it until I'm blue in the face, well, we've been sleeping, the left's been creeping on us. And this is what we get. This is what we get. We get a world now where we've got this ridiculous law in Queensland that's just been passed where doctors have to abide by government's rules. Well, I mean, what sort of alternate reality are we living in? It's happened because people are not involved in their community anymore. That's my strong view. So, yes, it's a political fix, but it is also a community-wide fix as well.
One of the things that I'm very mindful of, and actually I need to give some context to this because I'm mindful that there might be people watching that don't know who I am, don't know my background, etc. I have been wrong multiple times over the last few years, but there is a common theme amongst all the times I've been wrong. It's the times when I've said that the conspiracy theories were wrong. Those are the times when I've been wrong, right? Now, there are some conspiracy theories out there that are completely nuts and I've never bought into them and I won't buy into them. Yep. But as an example, when I first heard people saying, say no to mandatory vaccines, I rolled my eyes and I was like, guys, you are hurting our credibility, right? Let's just focus on the lockdowns, focus on the stuff that's real. Like, let's stay in the real world here. turns out the conspiracy theory was right. When I first heard people saying, "Oh, the virus came out of a lab in Wuhan, it wasn't a natural transmission from a bat in a wet market," again, I rolled my eyes. Guys, why do we have to bring in all this? You know, we're gonna get branded racist. I mean, we already were, but it's gonna happen all over again. It's an unnecessary distraction. Who really cares, etc. Again, they were right. And I was the one who was wrong by sort of saying, "Hey guys, let's put the brakes on." My own wife said to me at one point, she said, "There's going to be the military on the streets." And I said, "Babe, would you settle down? Like, come on, like, that's ridiculous." And it was only a few weeks later that we had the army and police working together, putting in the ring of steel, separating Melbourne from the rest of Victoria. And I have been able to live it down in my own home ever since. So I have been wrong more often in the last 2 years by being too conservative rather than being too out there. So it's in that context that I say to you, there's some really concerning things being done globally and in Australia, whether it be central bank digital currencies and digital IDs and what do you call it, social credit systems, whether it be this push towards net zero and all of the various consequences that they deny will happen, but it's obvious what will happen. And I have to kind of put aside my own conservatism and my own instinct, which is, oh, come on, no one could be that dumb. And I have to actually look at it and go, well, maybe as a species, we are actually that dumb. So you've been posting recently, and you're on top of this far more than most, about the potential for CDBCs, about the potential for social credit systems and these sorts of things. I think probably where I want to start, I want to explore a bunch of this stuff, but where I want to start, I think, is net zero. And all of the energy stuff that's going on. Are we seriously in a situation where, and again, I'm sorry to ask you to call out your own party, but both of our major parties, the parties of government, as they like to call themselves, have made commitments to achieve net zero in what I would regard as ludicrous timeframes? What's going on there?
Yeah, look, I mean, you're right about that. I think there are probably, I mean, look, there were a few, but there were a handful of us last year when that announcement was made by the then coalition government that we were going to pursue net zero that pushed back on it, that shouted about it. Myself, Matt Canavan, Gerard Rennick, some similar themes, but there were more. I think there was a degree of unease about that inside, but that was the decision that was made. I don't agree with it. I've had the view for the longest time that net zero is a complete nonsense. It's nothing more than a buzz phrase for European bureaucrats and carpetbaggers and all the rest of it. It's another way of the rich getting richer. The Western economy slowing down. It's a nonsense. We all know it, I think, and we've sort of bought into it now to the extent where we're looking for ways to achieve it that are less worse than something else. So look, let's start with that. I've got no time for net zero. I really am puzzled and vexed by the incredible way that this has been rolled out across the globe. I think it's an amazing exercise in creating fear. And I spoke once not that long ago about the use of the emergency, which is what we're seeing in politics now. It's so effective, putting fear into people, whether it be through a pandemic or through global warming. And as we can tell, it's pretty hot out there at the moment. So, but of course we know that La Nina is actually the result of me leaving the car on for 10 more minutes. So I get it, right? And the science is settled, right? We get that as well. The science has never settled on anything. I heard someone say, I was listening, I think it was a Joe Rogan podcast I was listening to yesterday, where they were talking about the James Webb telescope and how it's now showing things we didn't know 10 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever, and that they're, scientists are now musing about changing their definitions about how the universe was formed. Well, amazing. That science wasn't settled. How about that?
Who knew?
But this one is. So the COVID science is settled and the climate change science is settled. What a joke. So anyway, putting all that aside, what does it mean? Well, look, I have a view we shouldn't be on that bandwagon. I got some pretty strong views about whether we should be pursuing emissions reductions full stop. I think it's doing us more harm than it is good, but they're personal views. One thing I will say about my party is that would probably be agreed by some, not agreed by others, not the party platform, and I'm still allowed to say it. So, if you did that inside the Labor Party, goodbye, see you later, find another job and whatever. So, we can't be too tough. I mean, I'm going to stand here and defend my party as much as I can because, there are a lot of important things that come out of this. But look, the reality is here, we are now going to start to see the real impacts of these policies roll out through Europe. I think it's terribly sad. We're seeing, I think, the death of Western Europe in a slow motion format. People are going to die this winter because of these ridiculous policies that have come through, and a whole range of other factors. I know everything gets blamed on Putin. I get it. But in actual fact, all of this is because, the Green parties inside Germany and other parts of Western Europe, actually went and destroyed their coal-fired power, their nuclear power, and they're trying to roll some of it back now. So, if we follow that here, we're going to see the same agricultural policies roll out. We're going to see the same disruption to food. We're going to see all of those things. It's got to stop. And we're doing all of that without the benefit of nuclear power like they have in other countries as well. So, we are getting the worst of all of the above, in my view.
Yeah. Well, I've been thrilled to see yourself, and I believe I'm correct in also saying Senator Jared Rennick, along with the One Nation Senator, I've just had a mental blank. Malcolm Roberts, thank you. And a few others have been coming out and saying, hey, we need to have a conversation about nuclear power.
And that's the party platform as well, by the way. That's Peter Dutton. The party's platform is to explore.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay, good. Well, it's a step in the right direction, but we are decades behind on that front, and we are going to pay the price. We, thankfully, the saving grace for us is that Australia is either a temperate or a tropical climate. We don't actually live in the sort of cold climates where Northern Europe is going to have a really, really hard time. I agree with you on that, and that's an absolute tragedy. But I certainly hope that will jar us out of our stupor and into actually taking some of this seriously. I can't help but feel, and I don't actually. When did your family come to Australia, Alex?
Well, my mum's side have been here for generations. Dad's 1952, I think, from memory.
Okay. Yep. So one of the things that really concerns me is how incredibly lucky someone my age, born in Australia to Australian parents, actually was. And that's a wonderful thing. I was born in the 80s, and I think that's basically winning the lottery. You're born in Australia in the 70s or 80s, you've just won the lottery. However, I'm very concerned that we've had it so good for so long, and we've watched other people have trouble. Wars, natural disasters, economic slowdowns, etc. I mean, we hardly got affected by the global financial crisis. We hardly got affected by the Asian financial crisis, the dot-com bubble, all of that stuff. It happened on our television screens. And I think we've reached a point here where we're incredibly arrogant and we think that it can't happen to us. What's going on as you see it economically? I'm very concerned about the levels of debt. I'm very concerned about levels of inflation. It's my personal view that real inflation is significantly higher than official inflation. It's been being fiddled with since the early 1980s for various reasons. What do you see as the outlook? Do you share my concern economically? We've talked about other concerns, but economically, where's your head at?
Yeah, I do too. I mean, I think you're absolutely right about the real inflation rate. I think that's consistent with history would show that, particularly in a country like Australia where petrol prices are so important and we're so reliant on long distance travel. And, I think the actual impact of inflationary pressures in this country are perhaps understated in many ways. And we're seeing that all through other countries. We're seeing it all through Europe at the moment. There were some staggering figures out of the US and Europe in the last couple of days about the inflationary rise over the last 6 months. Like, it's spiked. So look, I agree with you 100%. I think that is, that is very interesting. And as they say, who would have thought that would have happened when, globally we've printed whatever it is, $7 trillion or whatever the global market has, done. I mean, it's a very predictable response to, this sort of generation of money printing. So there's a lot of challenges there. I totally agree. The overall economic outlook, I think, is pretty dire for some parts of the world, but that was expected. I remember when COVID kicked off, a lot of the, discussions we were having was literally some countries are going to go bankrupt. I know that's a stupid non-legal term, but so we are insulated. We're very lucky. The thing that frustrates me though about all of this, and I gotta say it, is that we should be absolutely miles ahead at the moment. This country with so many resources. So much, room for expansion. We here in South Australia, we should have a nuclear industry that's already pumping. We should have we have something like a third of the world's uranium. The ability to take it, flat geological land, take it, use it for generation, and bring it back from other countries as well. The issue is that we have a now, and I think this is a product of what you talked about, having it too good for too long. We now have a class in the left, spearheaded by the Australian Greens, that have taken themselves from an environmental party into a neo-Marxist party. And now they are simply holding us back on every particular chance that we've got to get ahead. We should be setting up sovereign wealth funds for future generations in this country based on all of these resources we have, properly used, properly environmentally managed, by the way, because, of course, the great misnomer about this is that, immediately as soon as you start mining uranium and storing it, that all of a sudden your environmental regulations go out the window. It's a lot of nonsense. The reality is we're all environmentalists. We all want to see the planet survive. It's just that the left use this like a Trojan horse. They want this world plan to roll out, and that's what we're seeing. So the frustration for me is that we can't cast the shackles off. I think that gets back to the point you made earlier, is that we've had it too good for too long. You see in countries where you see good times, I think you see a growing green left, if you like, and that is drawing us back. It's holding us back where we shouldn't be. So if people are voting for the Greens, just understand what you're actually voting for. Just understand that you're voting for holding Australia back.
I refer to Greens now as anti-humans. They, in my opinion, and I'm not putting words in Senator Alex's mouth here, but in my opinion,
out there that might disagree with us.
In my opinion, what they've done is it's a very simple intellectual sort of mistake to make. They've accepted the misnomer that there is a zero-sum game between the environment and the economy. That every time the economy, the economy benefits, the environment must have suffered.
Exactly.
They think there's a zero-sum game between those two. And so then it's a very small step to get from that misconception to the idea that, well, if we just hurt the economy, then we must be helping the environment. And that's how I think sincere people have ended up actually in an anti-human position where they're just coming through like a wrecking ball.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. They live very comfortably next to each other. I was extremely disappointed, and people might disagree with this, but extremely disappointed to see we weren't exploring for oil on the Great Australian Bight. There was no way that was going to become an environmental problem. If people understood the environmental regulations, the fact that we were talking 600 metres, kilometres offshore, in the strictest of possible ways in which you drill. I mean, you almost can't breathe out there without NOPSEMA, the regulatory body and the Environmental Protection Agencies breathing down your neck. Now, that was a relatively small basin. There are others around the traps as well around the country. But, we are blessed with these resources. We should be using them for everything they're worth. The reality is Australia is 1% of the world's emissions. We're not going to heat the world up, even if we're comfortable with the science. We're not going to heat the world up from this country's emissions. Gas, we need it. Other people need it. Europe needs it at the moment. We might as well have their money. It's a shame. It's a real shame.
So some years ago, I did a project titled the 50-to-1 Project. I traveled around the world. I interviewed a number of eminent scientists, the late Professor Fred Singer being probably chief among them, former head of the NOAA and atmospheric sciences and so forth, and a number of others. And what we did in that particular project, just to bolster your point here, is we assumed that everything that the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that everything that they said was correct. We assumed that they were absolutely correct in absolutely every formula that they had published. What we did, though, is we actually then looked at what that meant, which they'd never even done in their own publications. And what it meant, at the time, we were looking at Julia Gillard's Not a Carbon Tax. That was the big issue at the time. And that even if we had achieved all of the emissions reductions targets within that particular legislative project, it would have altered the Earth's temperature, according to the UN's formulas, by 0.004 of 1 degree Celsius in the year 2100.
Yep.
That's what we're talking about here. It's madness. And that's assuming they're right.
Yeah, that's right. Look, it is absolute madness. And yet, a little bit like it was mad to ever think that you were going to save your neighbour by getting a COVID injection. It was never the case. Fear, right? Fear did it. And of course, Dr. Robert Malone coined the phrase
Mass formation psychosis.
Mass formation psychosis. I can never remember it for some reason. That's my time.
It's not the world's most roll off your tongue kind of phrase. Let's be
I
honest.
just can't remember it anyway. So whatever. But so like that applies to climate change as well. And it is just simply fear, and it's a crime that we're sending kids out into the world now, having taught them this at school. It is, and Professor Ian Plimer, I saw one of the comments before, made the point that he spells it out really well. Look, he first came to my attention a decade ago. I think he wrote a book called Not for Greens, and the cover is a spoon. And the whole premise of the book is, if the Greens had their way, you wouldn't even be able to get this, because they're anti-mining, they're anti the energy required to forge it. And there was something else that I've now forgotten as well. But for whatever reason, it made the point how ludicrous these are in a real world. They're not real world propositions. No. You have to understand that these politicians, in many cases, and this is the problem with so-called progressivism, there's never a limit. So, if they get if we were to be 100% net zero tomorrow, there would be something else. And the premise of the whole thing is holding us back. It is. Yeah. It is nothing more than putting a lasso on us. And we've got to learn to shake it off. And I hope we don't have to go through bad times in order for people to get real.
My concern is that we might. Mark Taylor's put up the title of Professor Ian Plimer's latest book, Green Murder. That's his most recent one, which I chatted with Professor Plimer a couple of weeks ago in a slow chat. We talked about that book. Amazing book. But what strikes me, I ran for the Senate for the Liberal Democratic Party in Tasmania at the federal election. I wasn't a paper candidate. I was there and I campaigned, etc. But it was never really a winnable proposition. And sure enough, I didn't win. But a couple of fascinating things happened. So, of course, Tasmania really was the birth of the organised political Greens movement globally. It came out of the United Tasmanian Front in 1972. They formed and sort of officialised, and they had some traction within Tasmanian politics. And then in 1992, that then morphed again. A lot of the same people moved into the Tasmanian Greens, and then the Australian Greens were born out of that. And we've since seen the Greens, holding the balance of power in the Senate for quite a lot of the time since. So really, Tasmania was kind of the birthplace of the Greens movement. And while I was on the campaign trail, Bob Brown, of course, a former MP and leader of the Greens Party, was given a tremendous puff piece on, I think it was Four Corners, or it was one of those sorts of shows, spruiking the idea that we had to transition to this carbon neutral economy. It was going to involve all the batteries and all the wind farms and all the solar panels. And the question was put to him, where would we get these minerals from? And that's a really hot button issue in Tasmania, because they have a lot of mining and a lot of raw natural, sort of the basic ingredients for a lot of these electronic components are able to be mined in Tasmania. But of course, the Greens don't support that. And I kid you not, he says we should import them from overseas. What are the emissions on the boats there, buddy? And he names Africa, and he specifically says the Congo as one of the sources. Now, the human rights violations that we know are happening in the Congo right now in relation especially to cobalt mining and children, 8-year-olds being in those mines, heavy metals with no PPE, nothing. And it blew my mind, the blindness to one lot of issues in their almost religious pursuit of perfection in the one issue that they care about. Have we entered a new religious age? Is there a new kind of pagan religion or almost atheist religion? That's the best way that I can describe it.
Yeah, I think it is almost, it is almost zealotry in some stages, I think. And I mean, those are just the beginnings of the contradictions that exist in this. I mean, there's also the issue of, recycling of these parts and the disposal of them later on. We know that solar panels last about 20 years. We really don't have a plan for bringing them back. Like what are we actually doing after we have to pull them off every house and every business around the country? Also, wind farms. I mean, they are nonsensically carbon heavy in terms of putting them up. You have to almost spin them for 20 years to even get close to.
The concrete footings alone take decades to pay off the carbon debt supposed.
That's right. And the disposal of batteries, I mean, that's all in addition to the child slave labour. These things are a disaster. I mean, it is just a complete and utter fallacy. And yet, when you actually look at what their alternatives are, and there are some, gas is pretty low emission, but okay, let's put that aside. Nuclear power is emission free. It is now sort of getting to the point where it's becoming more cost effective. Senator Matt Canavan's actually put a bill up, which, will be a challenge to get it passed, but he's putting it up for the purposes of making it available there to be adopted, where his proposal is to remove the prohibition on nuclear power generation under the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Act, therefore making the decision of the marketplace. So all of the arguments about, we can't generate nuclear power because it's too expensive. Well, let's let the market work it out. Let's get that regulation. That dates back 20-something years.
Yep.
And it was a deal, I think, that was done with the then Howard government, with the Democrats and the Greens over, I think it was the GST. So, it's nonsensical for us to continue to have that prohibition on nuclear power generation. That takes the wind out of the sails. It's a bit like this argument about transmission and these COVID injections. Once you understand, and this stuff that was willfully ignored by many of our health bureaucrats and others, that transmission was never affected by the injection. You were effectively as infectious with the injection as you were without it. That was willfully ignored. It's a bit like that here. I mean, the Greens and others are willfully ignoring the very real baseload power that can be provided by nuclear power, simply because it doesn't achieve what they're trying to achieve, which is destroying our economy.
And that's where I say they've made this false equivalence. They accepted this false premise that it's a zero-sum game, and therefore, if we just hammer the economy. Now, I want to call out this comment specifically, and then relate it to something else that I had a chat with someone literally just today about. So Karen Blakeney says, when I had to shut my practice due to mandates, Senator Antic personally reached out to me from the other side of the country, the only politician that did. He has my respect and support for life. So that's a pretty resounding endorsement there, Alex.
Thanks, Kieran. Yeah, thanks. Things are okay.
I was actually speaking earlier today with another elected politician. I will say they are federal and they are not from your party. And when I mentioned to them that I was going to be slow chatting with you tonight, they had nothing but good things to say about you as well. So you've clearly made some impressions amongst the public and also amongst your peers and even your opponents. So Alex,
well, very generous.
Well, we're heading for a situation now where we have among the most expensive power in the world. If you say we have the most expensive power in the world, you get fact-checked instantly because, in the last week, some other country will have been more expensive. But we are among the most expensive power in the world. And yet per capita, we have the largest reserves of energy in the world. But I want to explore, and this is kind of a question without notice. I apologize, but this has kind of come up for me now mentally. Me personally, and again, this is going to piss off a lot of people, even my own followers, I'm actually in support of fracking, shale gas, all the rest of it. I think the scare campaign is completely overblown. I think most of the supposed problems with it are completely ridiculous. However, I will say this. Take, for example, Gippsland, where there is a widespread community campaign to make sure that fracking is never allowed down there. That campaign is on the basis, number one, of the misinformation, which I have no time for, but number two, property rights, which I do have a lot of time for. And the fact that what the government does is once the government says this is legal, they simultaneously are saying someone else can come onto your land and force you to give up part of your land and let them do it. To what degree is our energy situation sort of created by these overlapping issues where landowners don't really own their own land? And to what degree does that create the opposition?
Oh, that's a good question. It's a very good question. And I must admit, this is a gap in my own knowledge. Fracking is one of those things that I've always been a bit vexed about as well. I don't understand enough about the science to know whether it's really an issue or not. I'm very conscious about it in agricultural areas, though. I think, to the extent that we can avoid ever doing it in agricultural land, I think that's probably going to be a good thing. But I say that without any knowledge about the practice and whether or not it's really going to just, because one thing you get out of politicians all the time is this immediate theory that they know everything about everything, and that's just not the case. So I just got to make that disclaimer to start off with. But it is an interesting point. We see this all the time with compulsory land acquisitions, and there's one down the road here in South Australia at the moment with the North-South corridor, which has been a pretty good project. It was a project started by the Abbott government many years ago, this concept of property rights is always a bit confusing to people because, of course, there really is nothing like an absolute right over land. You are effectively, sort of buying it from someone else. You have better title to land than somebody else effectively. So, that is very true what you say. If you've got, if you've got the ability to frack someone's land, then someone does potentially have the right to come in over the top of you through the stroke of a legislative pen or something. So, look, I don't know, but I saw what it did in the United States under the Trump administration, and I saw what it did for their energy security. And the sky, once again, I'm prepared to be proven wrong on this because I'm speaking without any real background on it, but the sky doesn't seem to have fallen in. And I would say we are probably in the situation now where we probably have so many other reserves to dip into. Maybe it's less of an issue in this country. I don't know. I mean, it strikes me as being bizarre that we are so resource rich, and we're even thinking about having to use other alternatives other than the gas, coal, and the nuclear stuff. So, I don't know. I probably just don't know enough about fracking to really give a very good response to that. But it doesn't. The sky doesn't seem to have fallen in.
Let me come across to it to really, I guess, the land rights issue, because I think that's the area where I look at it. And we have, for example, in Western Victoria, there are new wind farms being put up, and in order to run power from those wind farms, we're having to run high tension power lines through farmland that has previously not had that. We saw this play out again in Tasmania. I don't recall the name of the island, but there's an island that has been chosen as a site for a wind farm. And now the Greens are in opposition to a wind farm. I'm not making this up. They are campaigning against a wind farm because they're not happy with the place that it's been put and where the cables are going to have to get run. It seems to me that we're tying ourselves up in knots here, where even the Greens are saying, no, you can't build it on that land. How are we ever going to achieve a net zero with the amount of windmills we would need, with the amount of solar that we would need, without compulsory acquisition, without the violation of human rights that comes with that?
Yeah, and it gets even worse than that. I mean, there are those that will tell you we can't achieve net zero without demonstrably affecting our agricultural sector. And you're seeing that in Europe at the moment. We're seeing that all throughout the Netherlands and Holland, where they are literally rounding up livestock and shooting them because there isn't the feed, there isn't the future for them, and the land is wanted for other purposes, and so on and so forth. So, we've got a whole topic there about the World Economic Forum and their involvement. We're in a different part of the library at the moment, but I think these are the real steps. It's a bit like green politics itself. It's all very well nice to talk about it, and it's the land of sort of rainbows and unicorns in many sense. I mean, who wouldn't want the concept that you could pick up sunlight and get free energy from the sun? It just sounds great. We're all swinging hands and saying kumbaya, but the difference between the sort of the conservative politics and green politics is that one of them lives in reality and the other one lives in fantasy land.
Sure.
I think that's never, it's never been more properly demonstrated than that. The Greens pushing off wind farms. I mean, it's just, and I think Bob Brown was actually talking about it from a point of view of conservation and some particular eagle or condor or, something in there. And, they don't know whether they're Arthur or Martha sometimes, these people.
Yeah. Nick and others are asking as well. We will get to the excess deaths issue. That is something that Senator Antic has been posting about. We will get there. But that's not the only thing going on. And what I don't want to do is make the mistake of focusing on the thing that's being shoved in our faces, or the thing that the one thing, and we drop the ball on the others. There's quite a lot going on. You've spoken about the World Economic Forum, and the World Economic Forum, of course, was another one of these crazy conspiracy theories that, of course, was just nonsense, and only some tinfoil hat-wearing nonce would ever bang on about it. The Great Reset was a myth, except for the fact that actually Klaus Schwab had published a book by the title The Great Reset, and there were speeches where they talked about wanting to do the Great Reset. So it was this Ministry of Truth kind of thing. We don't believe your lying eyes. Just believe what I tell you. Yeah. What would you say is the truth around the World Economic Forum? The fact is they don't hold government anywhere. They're not capable of making anyone really do anything. So what is the concern? Why do you mention them and post about them from time to time?
Yeah, I mean, look, I speak about it in Parliament as well when given the opportunity, because I think it's one of the really important issues that's skirting around, and they've been around for a while. Been around since the 70s, I think. Klaus Schwab set them up, so it's not like it's a new thing. Why now, you might well say? That is a very good question. I think part of the issue is that it takes time to build up a head of steam, and really, at its essence, what we are looking at is a think tank, if you like, or a sort of a community, or an economic forum, a World Economic Forum, as you say. But what's the problem with that? Well, on its surface, nothing really. I mean, there's nothing wrong with people getting together and talking about issues.
And they're not the only one in the world either. There are other similar.
Doing it. No, that's not. And they're open about it. The thing that troubles me is, well, there are a heap of things actually that trouble me about the World Economic Forum. The first one is the language. The language that's being used is really worrying. This concept of stakeholder capitalism, which is really, in my view, nothing more than communism in a different form. It's like Margaret Thatcher said, that communism never really disappears. It just changes its clothes and it always comes back. I think we're seeing that across the world now. I think we're seeing it in the West. So the language that's coming out of it is very, very troubling. And really, I think the influence that's being built, I think the thing about this becoming an influential group and people wanting to join the club, if you like, is the thing that troubles me. I think it's only natural for aspirants, people who are involved in business and politics, to want to be in with the cool crowd, and then have to almost, even if it's unwitting sometimes, pledge their allegiance to the cool crowd through their actions. I think we're seeing that at the moment. I mean, it is troubling, that language. We've heard it all before millions of times, but we pierce the cabinets, says Klaus Schwab. We have influence in lots of different cabinets all across the country. They talked about how many they had in Canada or New Zealand or whatever. That to me is very, very troubling. But once again, how do you criticize it in the sense that, people are just coming together with common purpose? The net effect of it is something we haven't seen before. This concept of globalism has taken on a new position, I suppose, because of technology. It's enabled us to do things like we're doing tonight, where we didn't have that before. The transfer of ideas is very quick now, and things that we see starting in the United States politically, on the left, we see coming through the chamber from the Greens days later, whereas it used to take 6 months. So everything's picked up speed, and I think the ability to influence governments now has never been greater. That's the thing I think that's changed. But having said all of that, I'm so worried about it that a month or two ago I moved a motion through the Senate that people in the Australian Parliament need to declare whether or not they've got any connections to NGOs, right? So it wasn't just the World Economic Forum, it was non-government organisations generally. That might be a whole host of them, of which the World Economic Forum is. As it stands at the moment, politicians, and everyone can access this, people can go online and find out where their local politician banks. Literally you can find out where that person, he or she, holds bank accounts. All of this stuff that is important. I think, transparency is important, but we don't know who they're talking to. We don't know if they've had any involvement with the Gates Foundation or, the Red Cross or the World Economic Forum, making no, particular bones about who it is or what it is. But I want to know. And that was put up. It was supported by One Nation, the Liberal Party, and others. And the Greens and Labor didn't want to support it. Who would have thought?
Yeah, who would have thought? It is interesting, and the suggestion has been made in jest, but I'd like to see it happen, that politicians should wear jumpsuits like what are worn by racing drivers that have all of their sponsors all over them. If politicians had to wear that in Parliament, I think we'd see a greater level of transparency.
Yeah. Well, we would. I mean, that's effectively what it's doing. The Register of Interests and the Gifts and Benefits Register, and the political donations stuff is meant to do that. It's I think it's very hard. I mean, I think it's very hard for a host of reasons to ever really know what's going through people's minds. But ultimately, what we want are people that are firm in their beliefs. From my point of view, we want people that stand for the sort of values that you and I would think were important. There's one thing to brick in people to support those people. It's another thing to find people that are willing to get up and put their head above the parapet. Because I think, that is hard work. As much as I love the abuse, and I do, and I'm seeing a disappointing amount of trolling tonight. But anyway, hopefully
trolls, can you just step it up a little?
Yeah, hopefully we've got a few from the Adelaide Advertiser or something like that. Whoever, I don't care. Just whatever. Let's go. So, all
right. So you were one of the earlier, certainly federal politicians to speak out against the idea that the COVID-19 vaccination should be made mandatory. And I'm going to fully declare my position here. I have no issue with it existing. I have no issue with it being developed. I have no issue with people taking it if that's what you believe is the right thing to do. I have two issues. Number one, the idea that it can be made mandatory in order for me to participate in ordinary parts of life is disgraceful and a human rights violation. And number two, there cannot be informed consent without accurate information. And we've not been provided that, in my opinion, right throughout this entire saga. So that's my position. That's where I stand. Full disclosure. I don't have if you've taken it and if you believe that's what was the right thing for you, go for it. It is your body. You do have that right. But I do not believe it should have been made mandatory at any point in time. Can I ask, and again, I'm asking you to tell me things that you probably don't want to, but what was the consequence to you speaking out on that within the Liberal Party and within Canberra more generally, with being willing to be the outlier on that particular issue, because that was an incredibly heated issue?
Yeah, it was a pressure cooker at that stage, and that's what politics is. I mean, I think things probably get hotter than that than over the course of time in politics. So I'm not, there's no backing away from that. It is what it is. But look, I don't know. Somebody from the opposition side at that stage, the other side of the chamber, approached me at one point and said, if you'd done this in our team, you'd be out the door as quick as look at you. I suspect that there was a lot of noses out of joint on my side, but I certainly never felt it. I mean, there is a certain inbuilt, I think, ability inside the party to vary. You wouldn't want to be varying every day, that's for sure, because then you might say, well, maybe I'm in the wrong place. But internally inside the party, I didn't feel it. I think we had a lot of people that perhaps weren't in a position to be able to do what I'd done. And I have to say, just in defence of a lot of my lower house colleagues, there were many that did say bits and pieces and showed their unease and lobbied privately for something to be done. It is much easier from the upper house, right? So, really the Senate and the various upper houses around the country are the places where you would expect people to take a bit of a stand like this. So another reason why I felt it was incumbent on people like me to do that. But I didn't feel it. I mean, I have to say that little period at the end of the year, the last sitting period where, I was taken from the airport, which I knew I was going to be, by the way, and put into a Medi hotel, which was, peak ludicrous, really. But it was what it was. It just doesn't bother me. But that was probably the biggest pressure cooker. There were instances there where people I knew, people that I'd known around, got pretty angry. I got some text messages from people that I'd known, not really friends, but text messages that were pretty abusive. At that stage, everybody was sick of the lockdown. Everyone thought that the injections were going to be the great saviour, which of course they never were going to be, and we knew that. And so things were pretty hot. But look, that's politics. I mean, honestly, if you're just sitting there, and someone said this to me once a long time ago, if you're just sitting there and nodding, well, what's the point of having this job? It's a nonsense.
Correct. And I'm not going to say this in the context of politicians in Canberra and your lower house colleagues that you were just mentioning, but I will preface these comments by mentioning them so that people can mentally bring them along for the ride. I absolutely love what Matt Wong from Discernible said to Crystal Mitchell. She was a serving police officer. Matt Wong, like myself, had many police officers sending us messages saying, "Oh, I'm so unhappy about what's going on." And Matt finally lost his temper at Crystal and said, "Well, what are you going to do about it? Stop being in my inbox telling me that you don't agree with it and you don't support it. And actually, what are you going to do?" And this is one of the criticisms that I have of many of these lower house politicians. I'm going to bring it back to them anyway. I can't help myself. Of many state, federal, across the board, cultural leaders, political leaders, community leaders, etc., that are coming out now and saying, "Oh, well, I was never really on board. I was never really happy about any of this." Where were you? Because our situation here in Victoria is that we were getting the crap beat out of us on the streets of Melbourne for daring to be willing to say that publicly and to get together and say it with other like-minded people. And we would have loved that support. And Alex, to your credit, you were one of the people that was speaking out. And we felt that from a moral perspective, we felt encouraged tremendously by that and others. But my question for those lower house colleagues of yours and for police and for many others is this. If you were in court and you were charged with the crime of having been on the right side of history when it came to those vaccines, would there be enough evidence to convict you? Because in the case of a lot of these people that are coming out now, there would not be enough evidence to actually show that they were of that view at the time. And for people in that position, that privileged position, you spoke of this earlier, Alex, the privilege of representing the people of Australia or your constituents within your state or your lower house seat. It is incumbent upon you to speak, because so many of your constituents can't. And this for me, and I'm going to pin this on the Liberal Party and say, if the Liberal Party really want to say that we are the party of those principles, the principles espoused by Robert Menzies, if you were accused of that in court, I would have a very hard time as a prosecutor actually nailing that on you and having you found guilty.
Yeah. Look, we're seeing that. I mean, I said the other day, I was talking to a group and I said, you can almost hear the sound of backpedaling at the moment. It's like the sound of bike chain and gears going backwards in the opposite direction. You really can. I mean, it's happening across the board. Things that you're getting away with on Twitter and Facebook and the other social media platforms were unthinkable 6 months ago. So, it's I don't know. I guess it's human nature in a sense, isn't it? And once again, I think, there are people who, who probably, if they had their time again, would do things a little bit differently on all sides of politics in all different parliaments. But ultimately, I think for a lot of people, it was a slow motion train wreck. I think for many people, and I'm going to try and defend those who perhaps weren't vocal enough. Sure. It was hard to see. I say it to people all the time. Every time I meet someone that I talk to, like yourself, or that's done such an incredible job in getting the message out there, I'm relieved because I feel like I'm not going crazy. I feel like you sometimes think you are going crazy because this couldn't be what we're seeing. It couldn't be right there in front of us. And so I think people went through that for a long period of time and, almost caught napping, if you like. But history shows that I think this is a pretty groundbreaking time in our lives where the things we have thought couldn't happen are starting to happen. The things that the freedoms we thought were just, insurmountably bricked in are not. And the question you come back to is, what do people do about it? Well, I say to people, if you're frustrated by the process, if you were down talking to your local MP and you were writing to them and you were getting on social media, well, have you thought joining a political party? The truth is there is so much power to be had for the individual inside a party like ours. I've seen example after example of it. We've had 18 months of having people come on board with our party. And I've seen too many to even go through instances of people changing the minds of elected members, not because they're pushing them, but just because they've been talking to them, or being able to get something through the pipeline to make it into policy. It is very, very real. It seems like you wouldn't get anywhere. It seems like a big bad behemoth, but these parties are run by small numbers of people who are always looking for new members. Get involved. Come with me inside the machine, and we'll fix it. It won't happen overnight. It's like the old Pantene commercial. It won't happen overnight, but it will happen.
But it will happen. Goodness, showing our age here, Alex.
Yeah, I know.
Look.
Anyway, so that is something. Whoever said that was absolutely right. Stop whinging about it. Let's get on and fix it.
I'm with you on the sentiment. I've chosen to do that in an alternative party, let's say, a party that at the moment has negligible amounts of traction, but I'm hoping to improve that. You've chosen to do it from within a party that is a potential party of government, and in fact was a party of government in the election where you were able to get in. But in any case, each person watching, I mean, there's over 500 people watching right now. You make your own choice as to who you want to support, but please get involved. I'm so sick and tired of this apathy that Australians almost seem proud of. Oh no, we don't talk about politics. We don't, like seriously, guys. What was it? I'm going to misremember. I feel like it was Voltaire, but it may have been someone else who said that the price you pay, the penalty for being disinterested in politics, is that you end up being ruled over by lesser men than yourself.
Allegedly Plato. There you go.
Plato, was it? There you go. Okay. Allegedly, all these quotes. Of course, yeah.
It was probably Plato's grandmother, but whatever.
but the point stands. It's one thing to say we're not being ruled very well. It's another thing to actually be willing to put your hand up and try and have some level of influence.
And we get it. People are busy. Like, we get it. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do. And also to navigate it as well, which is why I say to people, if you come on board with us and you join up and you let me know. I've got an email address, alex@believeinblue.com.au for the South Australians. Get involved, come with me. I can, I'm constantly communicating with people saying, this is important, that's not. And, the other thing we're trying to do is build a sense of community as well, where we have speakers that come and talk about things that are actually important. One of the things I think politics has done really,
Can I drop that email address into the comments here so that people can click on it?
You sure can.
Yep. Sorry, continue.
Yeah. So one of the things I think politics has done really, really badly is this business about really getting people involved and engaged and listening to important speakers. Having that sense of community. I feel like in many cases politics has just gone through the motions. There can't be anything more boring than getting another politician turning up and talking to you about their committee they just sat on and how interesting. Well, there's no one's interested in committees. People that sit on committees are not interested in committees. Sorry, but that's just the reality of it. So, we have to find a way for people to coalesce around issues that are important to them, speak to them, form policy, get interested in politics. The number of people I've seen already that didn't think they were MP material that are now, and they probably don't even know it, but are now on that path and are good, solid people who have all the right traits. There are people we've brought in through this messaging in the last 12 months here in South Australia that are going to become the next generation of people. And the issue is this: Parliament can do anything. If in South Australia, in the lower house here, if you've got 24 people that feel particularly about a particular piece of legislation, it either passes or doesn't pass. So, I think people have this view of politics that it's some great big beast that's uncrackable, and these parties are well-oiled machines that people can't get involved. They can, they should, they must. And if we bring people with us, we win.
I just misspelt your email address. Thank you to I can't remember who it was, but someone just asked me to spell check it, and I am just doing that now. At BELIEVE inblue.com.au. Thank you.
It rhymes. It's an alliteration.
Thank you to whoever pulled me up on that. It's fat fingers and late at night. Okay, so look, I'm in furious agreement. I would differ slightly on the strategy, but I'm in furious agreement. We need more people involved in politics, and we need more people that I disagree with involved in politics. This isn't just about the people I agree with. We actually, as Australians, we just need to put aside this apathy and actually say, you know what, this matters. And I won't go down a rabbit hole on rational ignorance and blah, 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 which I've done many times before. Those of you that follow my work, you'll be familiar with all of that stuff. So let's move on now. And there's been question after question, request after request, for us to talk about the elephant in the room, which is this excess deaths situation here. Now, the latest data I saw is a few weeks old. I don't know if any new data has come out, but at that point, it put Australia at a 17.1% excess deaths compared to a 5-year baseline prior to that. One thing that I haven't done is actually go back further to see what the natural variability is. There are people that I trust and that I listen to that seem to be expressing that 17.1% is a pretty extraordinary figure. Right. Is that the case? And is anyone looking into it? Let's not jump to conclusions about the cause. There are some pretty prime suspects. Everyone watching, I'm with you. There are some prime suspects in what might be causing that. But is anyone in Australia at an official level actually looking for a reason why this might be happening?
Well, if they are, they're not talking about it. We're actually, look, there's a couple of things that come out of that. First thing is, sadly, there was new data 3 days ago. I think it was actually 4 days ago. The 27th of October, the next tranche of data was released. And it shows an uptick again, 17.3%. It's about 111,000 Australians excess death over the 5-year baseline. For that period, I think it's up to about the end of July, I think that is. There you go. 17.3%, as Serena says. Is that unusual? Yeah, it's incredibly unusual. I don't think it's happened, it happened any time through. And the interesting thing is that all happens with Australia as almost a sort of a unique outlier in the world, where we had COVID held out for a long period of time. We literally didn't have many cases. We had a few, but not many up until about this time last year. So these arguments that it's long COVID, this sort of concept of long COVID, which I think is ostensibly made up, they are ostensibly adverse reactions from what we can see. Now, maybe I'm wrong about that. Once again, the interesting thing about this job is you get a chance to just espouse theories based on absolutely nothing. So I will say that from the outside, these are talking points rather than discussion. But the fact is that is happening all over the world, all over the West, where the rollout happened of the COVID injections. You're
UK,
seeing
parts of Europe,
Taiwan,
everywhere that's releasing data, it's up.
And that includes countries that did different things with their lockdowns, more or less, whatever.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's frightening about that are the fertility rates. The data on fertility is showing a similar trend in different countries, 20% lower fertility rates, and you name it. Look, I mean, none of this is scientific. Everyone's now talks peer-reviewed and all that sort of stuff. I get it, all of that stuff. But ultimately, it's, in my view, pretty unlikely that this results in anything other than the mRNA injections. I don't see how it possibly could. I get the arguments about people not going to their doctor or drinking too much in lockdown, COVID itself. I get all of that. But, any statistician would be able to tell you that really the key factor here is the rollout. So, look, the question I think was, is anyone talking about it? No, they're not. I cannot for the life of me get a journalist from the Mouthpiece Media to talk about this for a host of reasons. Anyone can pluck out reasons why, it might be. One of them, I think, is simply the fact that a lot of these organizations pushed this agenda for so long that to turn around and get into that backpedal mode in a short amount of time would be embarrassing.
Yeah.
Who cares? We've got to start talking about this. We've got Senate estimates coming up in a week. I can tell you right now, there are going to be some pretty serious questions asked about all of this stuff. We'll be interested to see the responses from some of our health bureaucrats. I'm not really too hopeful that we'll get we'll get too many helpful answers, but we will do our best and continue to ask the questions. I think this is an absolute scandal. I think it's even more of a scandal that no one will talk about it with any degree. I mean, let's think about it. 111,000 Australians over the 5-year average. So 110,000 Australians are dead over the normal amount. I mean, imagine that if it was a war or a conflict or a terrorist act.
Or I don't know, maybe like an infectious disease, if we had those death figures from some, I don't know, new bat-derived virus. I'm just purely spitballing here. But if that was the death figure, can you imagine the response?
I mean, it just doesn't. You can't. It goes to show the power of the media. If the media picks up an issue and runs with it and prosecutes it with its full effect, it becomes an issue out there. And I mean, we don't see too many adverts anymore for. Remember the Channel 9 celebrities out there all telling us to go and get vaccinated. Everyone, one of the things that really struck me about this period, we asked this in Senate estimates as well. Someone told us that there was and I hadn't seen it because I don't get a lot of snail mail anymore, but that Australia Post were sending around, stamps on their franked mail saying, get vaccinated or something like that. I mean, since when do you take medical advice from Australia Post? So, this sort of lunacy that happened in the last little period is extraordinary. And, there's just so many things that were not right. You don't even know where to start sometimes.
Yeah. Look, I think Mark Cowling is absolutely on the ball with this comment here, in my opinion. Again, not putting words into your mouth. The absence of scientific curiosity from the supposed experts on these issues is close to being enough clear evidence. If they don't want it being speculative, then do the damn science. This is it. If they don't want us talking about it and saying, well, it might be, right, then someone actually needs to go into the data, go into the death certificates and do the research. And to my knowledge and to your knowledge as well, based on what you've just said, we're not aware of anyone of authority actually doing that in Australia. And to my knowledge, that is replayed around the world as well.
And they may well be. They may well be. And we'll certainly be asking those questions.
It could be happening.
At this point, no one's talking about it. The press aren't talking about it. And so how do we know?
Yeah. Excuse me. For those of you that are interested in diving deeper into this that may not be familiar with it, I recommend a YouTube channel by a Dr. John Campbell. He's a British doctor, very, very factual. He has to be very careful what he says and how he says it now because obviously he is questioning the new religion. And so he simply talks about the data from around the world, including from Australia. So Dr. John Campbell, British doctor, I've been following him for a couple of years now. He came up, he sort of exploded during early COVID because he was just factual and reasonable and non-sensationalist. And I really do recommend Dr. John Campbell if you do want to go deeper on this. He's on YouTube. Okay. So we've covered a whole lot of stuff. We've covered a lot of ground already. I want to look ahead now and say, okay, we're in this mess. That's my words. I call it a mess. We're headed for hard times when it comes to cost of living, when it comes to energy reliability and energy costs, when it comes to our relationship with government. I can certainly say here in Victoria, the relationship with government, with the state government here in Victoria, for many of us, is very, very strained. There is a lot that has happened in the last couple of years. Let's just accept that that is what it is. How do we navigate our way forward from here? How do we rebuild trust? How do we rebuild that sense of community and optimism that I think used to define us? Mm-hmm. And I'm concerned is disappearing. What's the way forward from here?
Well, once again, I hate to come back to this. I say it all the time, but I think it's important here. It wasn't that long ago that we were all in this together. If you remember,
sure.
It was about February, March 2020, and we were all in this together. And it took about 3 or 4 months for it to be almost every man for himself, which always upset and troubled me in the sense that it didn't seem to take that long. It was sort of almost a bit telling. But I think ultimately Aussies are pretty pragmatic. One thing I hope doesn't have to take to get back to there is a period of prolonged trouble. I think there is the possibility of that, and that certainly would do it. I mean, we saw it through wartime in the 30s and 40s and others as well. People become much more pragmatic when they are facing, the sort of things that our grandparents' generation faced. Now, let's hope
existential crisis.
Yeah, an existential crisis, the ability to, fight in a war or not eat or whatever it may be. Let's hope it doesn't come to that in order to do it. But I do think we are slowly building through. People are getting to grips with this. I don't know about you, but in fact, we did some polling about this. It was about this time last year about the issue of the COVID injections. And did you feel pressured? Well, even at that stage, something like 30 to 40% of South Australians who were polled felt pressured to take this.
Correct.
I think people are more across this than they're still willing to talk about. And I think we're seeing, a refreshing amount of retrospection on this, that people are, perhaps a bit more across it than we thought. So that's the first thing. Don't underestimate people's ability to get to the point. I think a lot of people get it and don't want to talk about it, but we'll get to that.
Sure.
The second thing is, I think, there is a pendulous effect in politics. We often do see through complacency or whatever a swing, let's say, to the left, and let's hope we see a bit of a swing back to the centre right. And I think we're going to see that. That's just the nature of things as well. It is definitely the case, though, that Aussies have had a pretty good run, as you said, right from the beginning for decades on end, since the post-war. And I think in many respects, and this is all of us, by the way, this is not. Not just any one particular group. I think we've had it too good for too long. I think we've become, complacent and lazy and disengaged with all of the things we used to. We've never seen community participation lower, things like, sporting groups, community groups, politics, whatever it may be. So I think from where I sit, I want to see people re-engage with all of those things. Get off the phones, get off Twitter, get off the TV. No one turns on the fake news TV anymore. Who cares? Get out into the park and let's mingle with community again and get back to what's actually important, which is family, community, and staying involved. So, I think historically we would show that we would drift back into that, but it doesn't. It's going to take people to understand what's important, and let's hope. I just hope and hope and hope that we don't have to go through bad times in order to make that realization. That's my fear.
Look, I'm with you on that, but I do worry that the evidence of the federal election. We had a wonderful Victorian state MP. We had 3 fantastic Victorian state MPs that really stood up when it mattered for us. and they were David Limbrick and Tim Quilty from the Liberal Democratic Party and Catherine Cumming, who was an independent, and they really went into bat for us. And David Limbrick then stood for the Senate, and we weren't even able to elect him. Now we did elect Ralph Babbitt, and I'm happy about that. I've now met him twice, and I've chatted with him briefly, and I've seen his speeches in Parliament, and I think he's a good egg. I think he's on the right side of history. I'm not unhappy about that. But the fact that we couldn't get one of the few MPs that stood up for us in Victoria actually elected into Canberra is a worry for me, because I worry that maybe we haven't actually suffered enough. I worry that it is going to have to get somewhat worse before it's actually going to get better. From the position of opposition where you are now, I want to come back to a question, because I think we ended up sort of rabbit holing down something else and we never quite got there. What is it that you can do as a senator in opposition, and what is it that your party can do in opposition to try and actually nudge us in a better direction than the one that I fear we're heading towards?
Yeah, I think make the case is the first thing. I mean, we have to come up with a suite of alternative policies that touch on these things. Things like we heard out of Peter Dutton the other day about addressing this sort of radical gender theory in schools. I think they actually, those sorts of issues really enliven people's imagination. People are just not interested in listening to, discussions about a federal ICAC. I mean, that's just a made up. That's just a made up thing that's a solution looking for a problem, in my view. It's not to say that, there aren't, instances, but on the whole, that's hardly a sort of a suburban baseline issue. It's
we're not talking about it at the pub, I can assure you.
Yeah, you're not talking about it at the pub. No one's talking about it. And if you are, you need to drink somewhere else, because it's not very interesting. So that's the first thing. And so I think it's now for us to start to build the case for opposition. That is, I think we are going to go through a period of time here in this country where we have to live through what it looks like to have a Labor government, frankly. And the truth is, and I know people have been frustrated, but it is always worse with a Labor government. And we're going to see that. We're starting to see it now. They're chipping away at the edges now. They've had their 6 months, and they're now starting to pull this in. I think we're going to see it. People in the country, I think the agricultural sector are going to understand this pretty soon, what it looks like to push towards higher emissions targets. They've already pushed through the 43% regulated legislative, baselines target for emissions. That's going to continue. So we have to make the case for what it looks like, on the other side. And that means I don't think it's bold. I mean, every time, people say, oh, that was bold or whatever, it just sounds like, normal everyday politics to me. Some of the stuff I hear coming out of Ron DeSantis in the US, people would say here, like that would, the house would fall apart.
Correct.
Really?
Correct.
I mean, Aussies, I think, are ready for that. I think, coming from a sensible policy platform and this is the problem with, as you say, about the people that couldn't get elected from minor party platforms. That's the point. The point is that there is, a very difficult task ahead for people who share these views outside a major party tent. They need to come back with us and join the movement inside the Liberal Party, which is growing. And I think if we do that, if we pitch a case which people like me can help be a part of, towards back to basics, family values, sensible energy policy, low taxing, all those sorts of things, people will come with us. And I think that's where our greatest hope lies. That's the best I can do, is keep talking about it and keep raising these issues. I mean, George Christensen was a great one for this. He was a voice of reason inside the party, as many are, but he was a very loud one, and he was very, very good at making the case. And in fact, I think he was the first one that really, raised some of the alarm bells internally about. I think he coined the phrase "a naughty or nice register" for vaccine passports and immunity. And I don't want to see this drifting into the naughty or nice register, he would say. We need to find more George Christensens to come back into politics.
Look, I did a slow chat with George Christensen. We went till after midnight. I find him a very, very good guy. It's been
a very misrepresented guy, I have to say. A very, very misrepresented guy. He is incredibly intelligent. and
Yes.
he was a force of nature in Parliament, and that's what it should be.
Yeah. And you know, there are people that I've had the privilege of meeting along the way because of what I do, some of whom I agree with, some of whom I strongly disagree with, that I just look at and go, we need more of you.
Yep.
And someone like a George Christensen is someone that I happen to agree with on a lot of issues. And I sit there and go, we need more of you. An example on the other side would be someone like oh goodness, his name escapes me, Dick Smith. I had a bit to do with Dick Smith a decade ago, and I disagree with him on the vast majority of issues. Our points of agreement are relatively few compared to our points of disagreement. But I found him to be a thoroughly decent, authentic human being that actually believed what he said he believed and was willing to put his money where his mouth is. Yeah. And I sat there and went, we need more of you. I disagree with you, but we need more of you. How do we get more such people into politics? And I guess I want to take a big step back from the specifics and the policies and get really kind of philosophical. How do we get better people into politics? Here's someone like myself sitting here, you know, and I've said this for many, many years. And like I said, I made an exception in the federal election, and I kind of, not regret that. That's too strong a word, but I won't be doing that again anytime soon. Where my position is, I want to do something useful with my life, which kind of rules out politics. Politics as a libertarian, which is what I am, I'm personally conservative, but I'm politically libertarian. It's a very defensive role. You're just trying to stop the bad stuff from happening. Yeah. No. I want to do good in the world. And so for me, it's sort of in business, in cultural stuff, in doing what I do. What has to change? How do we get better people into politics?
I mean, it's a great question. It's something that's probably only happened in the last, short period of time. Some of the stuff we talked about earlier on about the professional nature of politics, I think, is key to this. So we've covered off on that, but I think finding a way to make it so that it's not so one-dimensional, that we don't just have this risk-averse class that just plod through, and that does become very bureaucratic. And I think we have seen a bit of that across the board in politics everywhere, different parliaments, and you name it. So there's a whole heap of that. That means that we've got to find a way to make it appealing. And there are a whole heap of things that are not very appealing about politics for people, I think. The scrutiny is probably the number one thing. Many people would say, I'd love to become a politician, but I did something when I was 18, and
so I think it'll come out, and
But getting over all of that would be a start. Really, unless it's something pretty serious and criminal and nasty or whatever, then I think having the ability to be able to let bygones be bygones would be a start. I don't think this is not a remunerative issue. I think politicians are well paid. I think they're.
I agree.
It's not about money. I think it's about the conditions. I think it's also about giving people a reason to drop whatever they're doing. That's the thing. If you were a scientist working on some particular breakthrough, but you had a passion for politics, you're unlikely to drop that to go into Parliament.
Correct.
So finding a way to get people to do that, because there are strong-willed people in science, there are strong-willed people in the law, medicine, small business, whatever. But finding a way to attract them is really, really challenging. But what it has to be is getting real people. So my passion project has been getting real people back into politics. I think the other thing is showing them that there's a way. I think for many people, it looks from the outside quite understandably as being too difficult. Like how would I know? Where would I start? And for some people, it's as simple as just walking into a first meeting. So from my point of view, I see my role as being providing a safe landing pad for people who share our values, that are going to stick to them and stand for them, and trying to help them navigate the system as much as I can. That's really what it's all about. And there are lots of good people out there that will stand for Parliament. There are lots of good people that have got lots of strength and lots of ambition and whatever else. Politics has got to be more than just a career path. It's got to be, we can't have politics being a vehicle for people's ambition. We can't have people silencing themselves because it might cost them a stint on the blue carpet. That's got to stop. And I think sometimes that is the case. I think sometimes that's what happens. But more often than not, I think people just don't know where to start. It's about demystifying it as much as anything else.
Look, I'm going to say something, and I'm going to be very explicit. These are my words, not the good senators. But I think there are a lot of politicians that now are viewing their time in politics as a stepping stone onto the board of various international organizations. It's my personal opinion that we've had prime ministers who viewed their time in that job as a stepping stone towards the UN. That is my personal opinion, and unsuccessfully at this point in time. But I would argue that Kevin Rudd, one of the finest Labor prime ministers that we've had, along with Malcolm Turnbull, another fine Labor prime minister, he was just in the wrong party. Didn't necessarily view being the prime minister as the pinnacle of their career. They, in my personal opinion, viewed it as a stepping stone. And I think that that's a problem. There was a comment that's now passed me by. There's a lot of comments pouring in. Someone made the comment about how if we want good people in politics, they shouldn't be paid. I disagree with that, because what that does is only amplify the incentive for people to use politics as that stepping stone. And not only are you excluding people from perhaps a disadvantaged background themselves from actually entering politics, but you're actually increasing the incentive for people to then use it in those ways. So you've talked about getting good people into politics. I view you as one of the good people in politics. Can you tell me a little bit about the thought process? You had a successful career in law. Things were going along just fine, and you chose to just blow up your life and throw it all away in order to enter politics. My words, not yours. Can you share with us some of that thought process? And as much as you're willing, how has that affected family? How has that affected personal life? How has that affected professional prospects going forward? What are some of the considerations that for you, as one of the people that I view as one of the good ones, that you've had to take into account?
Yeah, I think there's a whole heap of that's probably weighs on a lot of people's minds before they even get involved. Putting aside all of the issues about how do I get involved, and people perhaps don't understand that at first. But look, for me, I studied politics at uni. I was always interested. I followed, American politics pretty closely as well. So it was always an interest. So that was
Sure.
the first thing. But that's no different to millions of Australians. There's lots and lots of people that are interested in politics. For me, it was really just about, I've never been into it. I wasn't a young liberal or anything like that. I didn't do any of those things. I sort of, it just wasn't my thing at uni. I'd probably be useless, to be honest. But I just couldn't, everything in bite-sized chunks at that stage in your life, just slowly. So I sort of came to it a bit later in life. I think, like a lot of people, the thought that it might be something you might do one day. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that have that feeling. And my suggestion would be, if you feel strongly and you share our values, do it now. Get in now and start, because it does take time to find your lane in politics. And even when you've got people in there trying to support you, it's like anything. You don't know necessarily, where you fit best. Are you a lower house person? Are you an upper house person? Are you sort of, somebody that loves going to, community events, and therefore you're a lower house person, or whatever it may be. But I sort of navigated my way through that. And, like I've been saying about all the other, people that I think should be trying to get involved in all parts of the community. I had a go at local government, and I was elected. I was elected to the Adelaide City Council, which, I'm still receiving therapy for, which has been good. I always do that. I'm going to stop doing that. But it's sort of funny and sort of a bit true. It was a very challenging, but a very, very important stage in political learning, because, I learned very early on in a small way how the system works and how much power the administrative staff and the bureaucrats actually have, how easily they can lead other people that are elected, and how the system can be kind of manipulated by the unelected. Wow, talk about a metaphor for what happened less than a decade later. It's always been there. I get it, but you forget how politically naive you are, even when you're interested in politics, until you take a dive into it, right? So that's what happened to me. I knew all this stuff. I'd watched Yes Prime Minister. I'd watched Yes Minister. I'd seen it all. I thought I knew how it worked, but I didn't. Fact of life, and so just getting involved in the process sets the train in motion. In a sense, and you find yourself getting interested. And, you know, I always remember my dad when, you know, he would tell me the story about how he got into the stream of medicine that he did. He said he became a thoracic physician, and he said that realistically that was his least liked subject at uni, but then he ended up doing it for a job. And it's a bit like that in everything you do. If you just have a go at something, you might find you're quite good at it, or you like it, or whatever it might be, and you end up doing it. So politics is like that. And I think people find like-minded people in a political environment like that, and it just becomes what you do. And so, you know, people, if I could give anyone any advice, is if you've got a passion for this stuff, if you've seen what's happened, particularly over the last couple of years, you feel strongly about it, don't think that you're a fish out of water inside, you know, an organisation like ours. Come on board, and you know, you will find like-minded people, and you will find the ability to influence what's going on. That's the critical thing. And, you know, for me, it was all about the stepping stones, because it's you know, I think the mistake people make sometimes is thinking you can just walk in off the street and become the next prime minister. Well, it sort of doesn't work like that, but it doesn't take that long. You know, once you're involved, and the train's off and running. And, you know, I think there's a deep sense of civic pride for a lot of our members. Some of them veer off and stand for pre-selection. Some of them never do, but all of them have a say, you know, and all of them have a really important role.
Yeah. I want to whack one particular myth on the head, and I'd love to hear it from you, Alex. There's been a few comments around the lifelong pensions that politicians get. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but it is my understanding, I'll just bring up one comment here, not to have a go at Peter, but to get good politicians, remove the cushy pension they receive when they retire or leave, at least not make it a free ride. There's no incentive to do a good job in the end. It's my understanding, Alex, please correct me if I'm wrong, there's an end has been put to that, and it was grandfathered in. If you were in before a certain date, then you would keep the pension, but anyone that came in after that date, can you elaborate on that?
You're spot on. It's a myth. It's a sad myth, a sad reality in the great scheme of things. I say bring it back. That's a joke. We still laugh in this country, you know. We still laugh. But you know, it was. I think the background to this was Mark Latham. I think is the one who raised it in opposition in 2000 and I'm trying to say 3 or something like that. And I think the Howard government, it was something. It was the early 2000s, and the Howard government adopted it. And it then spread through the state parliaments as well. So I think I'm right in saying that in every state, and certainly federal, but in every state parliament, there is no pension anymore. I have a feeling that the Prime Minister might be the exception to that, but I could be wrong. The reality is, I don't think that's a bad thing at all. There are, but it does cut both ways. One of the issues we do see, and this is one of those very practical realities of that decision, is that it is harder to move people on. It's as simple as that. So, people now get to the point where had they had the pension, they would move on. And I can hear people saying, so what? And I tend to agree with them. I mean, I don't see why politicians should necessarily be taking a pension any more than a judge should be, any more than anyone else should be as well. Politicians now get a higher rate of super. Look, the reality is, politicians are well paid for what they do. There's a lot of work. Let's not get that wrong. But they are well remunerated on all levels. People shouldn't be whinging about money, and if they are, they're in the wrong job. But the pension is gone, and and that's not going to change anytime soon, I don't think. Despite humorously,
and look,
I should have been calling for it to come back.
Look, if anyone tried to bring it back, I would be first to stand up and say, no, thank you very much. We spend enough on you already. Now, Senator, I'd love to take a brief break, and I want to come back and talk about American politics just for a little bit longer. I don't want to keep you till midnight or anything like that, but we haven't touched on American politics. It's something that both you and I do follow. What's happening over there is like, I wish I'd bought popcorn shares back when I used to joke about it. And now I'm like, man, I really should have bought popcorn shares. I reckon they'd be going gangbusters right now, probably the only sector that is. So we're going to take a 4-minute break. I'm going to play you a video. We're going to come back for more of a slow chat with Senator Alex Antic, and we're going to talk US politics. Don't miss it.
What we've currently got sort of works. If you're happy with sort of working, then fine, we can stick with what we've got.
It seems to me that it's been expanding enormously since my father. He said the loss of freedom and liberty in this country in his lifetime has been absolutely astounding.
Living a good life is all about having choices. So it's all about being able to make your own choices for what is best for you.
What I'm for choice. People should be allowed to live voluntarily and to make their own decisions and take personal responsibility. But for some reason, the government says you're not allowed to do that.
The government is spreading itself into everything, and everything that it does fairly badly.
We're reaching a critical stage where people are getting very involved in other people's lives and wanting to dictate or ban or control what other people do.
It's always done for your own good, and how could you possibly object?
So you only have one shot at this life. I really do support pursuing whatever you're interested in, as long as you're not hurting anyone else.
Think of the stories that my parents tell me about their childhood, and my childhood was completely different, and I expect my children's childhood to be completely different.
Everything involves a license or a rule. Everything is just stifling.
When you start to stack them all up in conjunction with each other, you really have lost a lot of your personal freedom.
We are over-regulating and micromanaging every aspect of life. If we continue to overdo it, people will just stop complying and do whatever the hell they want anyway.
Every single thing you build, even down to the bricks and the hardness of the bricks.
If I don't quite stop at a stop sign,
I've just bought a house, there's stamp duty on a house.
The faces of the bricks.
I have to have a license to keep my 3 little mice.
GST, income tax.
And we have to fill out a reptile license form.
There's car registration.
If I don't wear a bike helmet,
The colours of the bricks.
Council rates.
a fishing license.
One tax after another.
Compliance after compliance.
We have to register or fill out a form or go through some government department to do just about anything.
With absolutely no benefit.
Regulation for regulation's sake.
Every hour, every day, I'm breaking some stupid law. And not deliberately, just because there's that many we don't even know they're there, you know.
Things weren't always this heavily governed.
I'm to the stage now, I suppose, where I'm becoming more and more of a libertarian, where I feel that governments only should be involved in what's necessary.
Libertarianism really does support everyone being able to have their own view.
The government can be smaller, do a lot more good, and just leave us alone.
Reduce all of these red tape laws that they have.
Well, I just feel that red tape actually does strangle people's choices, so it reduces their quality of life.
I'm saying stop the spending, stop the taxing.
All this red tape, all this bureaucracy and these forms that we have to fill out and this endless micromanagement is just making us more frustrated.
I think without red tape, we would function just as well, but we would be much more efficient. We would be wealthier. We would have more time.
The way they govern, it's a red tape government. That's what it is. It's no longer just providing the bare bones and the structures to allow other people to govern their own lives.
It's really important that people should be allowed to pursue whatever it is that makes them happy. I think if we embrace the libertarian philosophy more, we would live happier and more fulfilled lives.
I'm happy to do that. I know my friends are happy to do that. My family's happy to do that. But for some reason, the government says you're not allowed to do that. We must interfere. We must add layers of tax. We must add regulation. We must add red tape.
If they want to win our vote, the best way to do it is to promise to leave us alone.
Alrighty, now that, believe it or not, is a video that I made 8 years ago. And I can't help but feel it's still very relevant today, 8 years on. And nothing, unfortunately, has been learned in the years since. And if anything, it's actually gotten sort of worse and more extreme. Okay, so my guest tonight is Senator Alex Antic. He's been incredibly generous with his time. I cannot stress enough how amazing it is that people of the caliber of Senator Antic, and as busy as he is, are actually willing to give me and through me, us, so much of his time. We're not going to midnight tonight. Okay, so that's okay. Don't worry. But it would be remiss of me to end this interview without discussing American politics. So I'm going to bring back on Senator Alex Antic. I hope you enjoyed that very brief break.
I'm still here. If you come back and the lights had all been off and there'd just been a blank screen, it would have been worrying. But I'm having a good time. It's been great fun. It's been really good. I just, we don't do enough of this stuff. And by the way, I should say from the outset that, I haven't said this to you yet, but congratulations on Battlefield Melbourne, by the way. I know it's time gone by now, but I was a pre-register for that. I was waiting. I was itching to see it, and I thought it was great. And it's a story that needed to be told, and it's now, because one of the things that strikes me is that wherever I see COVID stories reported across the world, I only ever see images from Victoria. After
isn't it amazing?
It's just incredible. They talk about COVID response, and it's the sort of things that you had in Battlefield. And we don't see stuff sometimes stuff from Canada, but those images coming out of Melbourne it's a historical record now, and your work is it's going to be right up there, I think, in terms of important documents. So it was a really important piece of work.
Thank you. That's very kind. And you've stuck around, and more than 420 other people have stuck around as well to watch us live. Obviously, thousands more are going to watch it as time goes on. American politics. I'm kind of going to open it up to you to lead where we go on this, because it's like they've gone nuts over there at the moment.
Yeah, it's never been more polarized, has it? I mean, I don't know whether it's more a case of it's easier to access now because of the internet and, the sort of social media and Twitter and whatever, and we can all just get it more of it. But I've never been more fascinated by it in an almost tragic sort of way, in the sense that, we just don't need the strongest arbiter of freedom to be fighting itself like they are. And yet, out of all of that, I do see some really good green shoots. And I didn't see who that was, somebody just there flipped that up about people like DeSantis and Kari Lake. And look,
so
there it is, Lizzie. Well done, Lizzie. Yeah, exactly right. So I mean, from where I sit, someone like Kari Lake, honestly, I forget that she's a woman, in a sense. It doesn't matter at all. She's just a strong, principled person, Like it's always great to see a woman politician. Well, no, it didn't even occur to me. She's just an absolute star.
Principled politician. Yeah.
Just a principled politician. And in fact, some of my favourite politicians of all time have been females, like Margaret Thatcher and, people like Kari Lake. And, there's some really, really good ones. So what we're seeing coming out of the US now is just this sort of, I think microcosm of it's almost like you can see it building in the United States. Those two, DeSantis and Lake are, future stars, and we'll see what happens. I mean, I'm very concerned about their process over there, their electoral system, and you probably hear it all the time as well. And maybe I'm being naive about this, but I just don't think we have the same problems with our system that that they have in the US. I think for the better part, we get pretty reasonable results, mainly because we don't do mail-in ballots. We count on the day mainly. I mean, there is a bit of drift on that. I get it with pre-polling and all the rest of it. I'm not a fan. I would like to see much less of that. And, I think it just dilutes the process, different issue. But the United States system really does worry me. I'm concerned about that for the midterms. But we will see. It's fascinating to watch. There's some interesting battles. You've seen this character, John Fetterman, from who's set off Tucker Carlson. He's like a red rag to a bull with Tucker. He just can't seem to stop talking about it because he's so incensed about how he's playing it, and the whole interplay between the next presidential run. It's going to be fascinating to watch. I think that November the 8th is the midterms. They're expecting a red wave. There was talk a long time there of the House being easily Republican controlled, but now they're talking about the Senate as well. We will see. Let's just hope we get a fair election. That'll be my first observation.
Look, I'll go into bat actually for the Australian Electoral Commission. I do actually think that they do an outstanding job. I said that prior to the last federal election, and I stand by that with all that I've seen. So much of what was said and claimed as proof that they weren't doing their job was actually just a lack of understanding on the part of the people making the accusations and making the observations. I did do some videos on that prior to the election on how the system worked, and then after the election on where some of these misunderstandings were coming from. That's not to say that it's perfect. It's not to say that there aren't individuals within there that might have some ulterior motives, but I think we've got a pretty good system. If you've seen 2000 Mules, the documentary by Dinesh D'Souza, it's pretty clear that there are some let me put it mildly, there are some very big unanswered questions in the US system. Now, what's been interesting to me, though, is there has been, because their system works very differently to ours, the federal elections are actually administrated by the states differently within each state. Each state actually makes its own rules around how the federal election will work within their own state. And what that means is that there have been some really amazing movements and pushback within individual states, particularly the battleground states, where some really weird stuff happened in 2020, where there have been some really conscious efforts to try and ensure integrity come 2022 midterms and obviously the 2024 federal election as well. Do you think that Trump is going to run again?
Oh, without doubt. I don't think there's any doubt about it. I think he's all but said it a couple of times on recent rallies that, I think he said it a couple of weeks ago, I might have to run, I don't think there's any doubt he's going to run. Okay. The fascinating interplay for me is him and DeSantis. What does that look like? And of course, I'm told, and I'm not an expert in American politics by any stretch, but they can't run as a president, vice president combination because they're both from the same state, I'm told. So, it's been said, well, why doesn't Trump go back to New York where he's from? And of course, that will get him a massive tax bill because Florida's a low tax state. So how much does he want the job? Not that much, I'd say. So look, it doesn't look like that's a possibility. But it sounds as though Ron DeSantis wants to challenge him in the primaries. And, and the more fascinating thing is who do the Democrats run? I mean, we all thought that Joe Biden wouldn't make the line this last time. I mean, he's surely not going to make the line this time. Their vice president, Carmella, is about as popular as, there's something I'd say in there that I would get wrong and then get myself in trouble, but not very popular, would be the way I'd say. And so it's all just intrigue, and it's incredibly entertaining if it wasn't so serious. So, but you're quite right about that state-based voting. That is one thing we don't have here is that they need, in one sense, I think, as a federal body to overlook this, like we have with the AEC. It gets a lot of flack. There's a lot of criticisms and whatever about it from I hear them. But I'm with you. I think on the whole, we get a pretty accurate result.
I tend to agree. This is so KM. I assume that you're watching from the US, given how you framed this comment. Yes, we technically have 51 separate elections. The Electoral College process is paramount for every state to have an equal voice. So thank you for watching from the US. I'm not sure what time it is over there. Let me know. What I find really interesting with the US is their president is elected directly. The president is the head of state, is the head of the executive branch in the same way that in theory in Australia, it's actually the Governor General that's in charge of the police and these various other bodies. And I find it really interesting. I mean, they also elect their politicians. They elect their sheriffs. They directly elect a much larger number of these powerful positions that represent the community. And you could point to examples where that's gone horribly wrong. You could point to examples where that's, gone very, very well. What strikes me is our systems are so incredibly different, but fundamentally we suffer from the same flaw, and that is that people are disengaged. And the right people are by and large not putting themselves forward. My big hope for the US is that as a result of the Biden presidency and as a result of some of the madness that we've seen with COVID over the last couple of years, that more and more people are getting involved. Now, we're led to believe, Alex, that a record number of people, I believe it was 81 million, showed up to vote for Biden. Remember, voting is not compulsory in the US. It is optional. I find that figure very difficult to accept, given that it was Biden that supposedly brought all of these people out to vote, along with, as you say, Kamala Harris, who is not even popular amongst her own sort of ethnic minority. She has put in prison an awful lot of people from within her own ethnic minority, and she's quite famous for that. The one big hope that I had for the Democrats was Tulsi Gabbard. Now, she's recently well and truly burnt that bridge. How do you see that playing out? Is Tulsi potentially a contender, not for this coming presidential election, but is she trying to position herself to run within the Republicans, do you think?
Well, it's hard to know, isn't it? I mean, she of course was a Democrat. She was a lifelong Democrat, and then just for people that aren't aware of that, I think about 2 weeks ago, said I can't be a member of this party anymore. It's a party that's pushing war in Ukraine. It's a party that's rotten to the core, and I don't identify with it anymore. It's an interesting strategy, and I mean, after all, she is a politician. How about that? She probably has a position, an angle on this. I must admit, I hadn't thought about it enough, but I hadn't thought about the issue of her being, a Republican candidate. But she's certainly got a lot of support. She's certainly got a lot of support in the conservative media, and Fox News and others. They're consistently interviewing her, Tucker Carlson and others, and. I think she was just on Joe Rogan's thing. I don't really know what to make of all of it. I think there was a comment before about not sure about what the motives are or something like that. I'm a bit the same way myself. I don't know, and it would be very difficult to imagine someone jumping ship like that could be somehow a credible contender for the other side. So I don't. Yeah, I'd be surprised if that happened. But look, ultimately, the Republicans, I think, have the talent. I mean, I don't see where the Democrats get their next run. Their next run of people after that are the Gavin Newsoms and a list of celebrity candidates that seem to always come back to Michelle Obama. And this is the sort of stuff that frustrates people so much about particularly American politics, is this dynastic approach to it. I mean, if Hillary Clinton had become elected, we would have had 2 Bushes and 2 Clintons in the space of 25 years or whatever it was. It's no wonder people were cynical. It just strikes me as being unhealthy in a country like that power is so centralized with a small group. Look, we'll see. But I think the Republicans have got all the talent at the moment. I think it's going to be very interesting to watch.
Well, on whether or not Tulsi could run for the Republicans, someone's made the comment here that Tulsi has said that she won't. I actually hadn't heard that, but I'll take your word for it that she said that she won't. But keep in mind that Donald Trump himself was a lifelong Democrat.
He was.
And then he switched and he ran and he won.
He raised money for the Democrats too.
He raised money for the Democrats. He was very public about that. So, I would not rule her out. She was. It was either 2016 or 2020. I think it was 2016 when she was running in the Democrat primaries, where I looked at what she was saying and I was like, I actually agree with you more than I agree with the Australian Prime Minister at the time. I'm actually better aligned with a Democrat in the US. Now, mind you, she's not representative of the Democratic Party. She was an outlier. But I actually found a lot to like about what she had to say. Now, some people are saying Tulsi Gabbard is connected to the WEF. Others are saying that no, she isn't. She's actually denounced the WEF. I don't know what the truth is there. Obviously, there's a couple of layers to that. As we talked about earlier, Alex, if you were an up-and-comer in politics and you wanted to have a future, and there was an organization there that said, hey, we run training for future leaders, where the World Economic Forum, that sounds perfectly legitimate. I can accept if someone were to say to me, yes, I did their Young Leaders Academy, I did these various things with the WF, but now that they've come out with what they've said and where they stand on all these issues, I'm opposed to them. Me personally, I would accept that, but that's obviously up to individuals. So why does US politics matter in Australia?
Well, I think because the United States is really the standard bearer for freedom. I think we've always put a lot of importance on our alliance with the US and what they do, to provide an umbrella for freedom and liberty and all the things they stand for and have. I think someone said it the other day, I can't remember where I heard it, but it resonated with me, that if we don't have the US as a free, functioning liberal democracy, then, where do we go? Who's protecting these rights on the world stage? And, I sort of spent probably a bit of time in my life being, frustrated with the United States through various periods. And it dawned on me that it was more frustration with the ruling class over there that we actually had. I was not a fan of the Clinton administration. I was certainly not a fan of the concept of another Clinton administration under Hillary. And frankly, I wasn't a big fan of much of the Bush administration either, to be absolutely honest. So, it's I think indicative of, once again, that political class. I don't think that's healthy. I think the days of getting people that are not trained political operatives back into politics, it applies in Australia as much as it does in the United States. Say what you like about Donald Trump. He was an outsider. He clearly rattled the cage. He did a lot of good things for the country. People don't like his style, but too bad. I'm all for results, and I'm all for people that I don't care what you tweet, as long as you're creating energy security and pulling people out of wars. That's all right by me, I tell you.
So you mentioned when we first brought up America just now, you mentioned the polarization. And this is a concern for me. I mean, now we tend to overplay this a little bit. If you go back in history 150, 200 years ago to some of the presidential elections, things were very bitter. The things that the candidates said about each other and accused each other of. I mean, I don't recall which one it was, but there was an election where one of the major party candidates was accusing the other of murdering dogs for fun and entertainment. I mean, it's always been sort of divided in that sense. But I do feel as though that division has gone from amongst the sort of the elites that are playing for power into the community.
Yeah.
What do you think plays out from here? I mean, we've got another 2 years of a Biden, or 2 and a bit years of a Biden presidency. Then we're going to have another presidential election in the United States. Can you see them coming together? If someone like a Trump or a DeSantis were to win in 2024, what happens to the country, given what we've seen?
It's an almost impossible crystal ball job, isn't it? Really, in the sense that, well, I mean, I don't think anyone really knows, except to say that I think they are pretty horrendously split at the moment on ideological grounds. Now, I mean, that's what we're seeing through our TV screens. I haven't been to the US since 2018, so I wouldn't really know what it's like on the ground there. Is that really the case in the scene? I imagine that there is a pretty clear split. I think there's probably been a split in the US for a long period of time between what Hillary described, I think, as the flyover states, or the deplorables, or whatever she called them, the elites on the various coasts. So that's probably been there for a while. It is worrying, though, and I think the sort of things we're seeing, or we saw when those various cities burnt during the BLM riots and the Antifa riots, and of course that was just completely glossed over by the press and whatever else.
They were mostly peaceful. Ignore the burning building behind me. They were mostly peaceful.
Peaceful, yeah, correct. And it's interesting in the sense that this period has certainly showed, even for people like me, who I think probably 5 or 6 years ago didn't understand quite how hopelessly compromised the media were, particularly in the US. I think there's a period of awakening now. Whether or not things have got to get worse before they get better, that's the big question. I think they probably do. I don't think the American fight between those two sides is done yet, and I think we'll see a lot more of that. And look, you can only imagine if Trump runs again, which I think he will, and if he wins, which I think he may well, then you can only imagine what happens. I mean, you saw what was happening in the last election. Stores were getting boarded up. They were ready for trouble, and it wasn't because they were concerned about January 6th or whatever. It was because they were concerned about seeing more scenes that they saw with those mostly peaceful protests. So I don't know. I do worry that things are not going to improve over there anytime in the near future. And there are those that think the country's headed towards civil war. If you'd asked me that 10 years ago, I would have laughed. Right now, anything's possible, I think.
Anything's possible, and that's part of what makes it such a concerning time is that really all options are on the table, and that's not a comfortable thing. Is it? I think it was an ancient Chinese curse is to say to someone on parting, to say, "May you live in interesting times," and that was considered a curse. And I think we very much live in interesting times at the moment. And I do wonder if rooftop Koreans are going to become a hot commodity at some time soon. Sorry, that's a reference to the LA riots in the 90s. Rooftop Koreans securing their own stores, etc.
That's right.
So what about Australia then, in the context of an America that is now, obviously very partisan when it comes to the Ukrainian conflict? And as my own position, again, full disclosure, my own position on the Ukrainian conflict is to say, stop looking for a good guy. Ukraine was one of the most corrupt countries on earth prior to the conflict, and there's no reason to think that it's suddenly magically improved once the conflict started. Putin is a man of tremendous ambition and is quite willing to see a lot of people die in order for him to achieve his ambitions. There is no good guy in this conflict, in my opinion. However, America has picked a side. Australia, moving with America, has, in a more reserved way, picked a side. Are we being dragged into another great powers conflict here by there are those that say we should just cut ties with America from a defense point of view. They're dragging us into another war. How would you respond to that?
Well, I mean, I think it's fanciful to think we could cut ties with the US. I don't think we can or we should, because ultimately we need them. We need their military tech. We need their nuclear umbrella. Frankly, we've got some enemies up north that. We need help with. We just can't do it on our own. Should we be dragged into a conflict? No, we shouldn't. I'm firmly of the view that Australians should never be sent to a place like the Ukraine to a conflict like this. I absolutely agree with you that we are dealing with a conflict between the most corrupt country in Europe versus the second most corrupt country in Europe. And frankly, I don't buy the narrative that one president is better necessarily on a personal level than the other.
Sure.
It's highly confected, and the media have played a role in that. Having said all of that, I think it's a terrible tragedy what's happening to people on both sides. I mean, and the thing that puzzles me is, why is this not being de-escalated? But why are we now seeing the Biden administration almost doubling down on threats and so forth? And of course, people would say, well, that's because of Putin. Well, Putin would say quite the opposite. Surely there's a way of pulling us away from this, conflict. We seem to be edging closer to a nuclear skirmish, or at least a widened war in the near future. And how can that possibly be here? I mean, there must be a way for this to be contained. And we've seen, instances where there was the story about Boris Johnson going over there and being, I think he was told that it was, don't worry about it and go home, or whatever happened. The opportunities to try and come to some sort of arrangement here must be there. They are always there. Having lived through litigation that I never thought would see settle, and I know it's a ridiculous comparison, but just bear with me. Cases that were so acrimonious that you could never get there. You always could. Why aren't both sides trying more? So I don't want to see us get dragged into anything like that. I've heard the arguments that if we don't stop countries like Russia in their tracks, then we won't stop them when they come through Taiwan and all the rest of it. Well, I think that's like chalk and cheese. That's like apples and oranges. We're talking about two different issues and two different. So Australia shouldn't be doing that. And, I would make this point, and I asked this question of DFAT back when it wasn't exactly popular, back in April of this year when the war was only kicking off. How do we know that Australian arms are not going to arm neo-Nazis in the Ukraine? That's troubling in itself. And if people don't think that's real, that's absolutely real. I asked DFAT, having got a lot of scoffing from the room about that question, I asked them how many members of the Azov battalion, which people will know is a neo-Nazi battalion in the Ukraine, do they believe they are? And I was told there were 3 battalions that were operating currently. Now, for the uninitiated, a battalion is about 500 soldiers. It's about 1,500 neo-Nazis that are floating around in the Ukraine at the moment. I'm not cool with that. I'm not cool with arming Nazis. So I think we're asking more questions about that this time around.
I marvel. And in all humility, I need to acknowledge I supported the Iraq war when it started. I supported the Afghanistan war when it started. I was a dyed-in-the-wool conservative at that time. I've become a libertarian since, in part as a result of a couple of years that I spent in the Army Reserve and sort of seeing behind the curtain and realizing, hey, these are just human beings. This isn't, the military isn't some special organization that you're made up of angels. It's actually just another corporation with a very different job description. And that really was the beginning of my journey towards becoming much more politically libertarian than what I was growing up. But I supported those conflicts at the time, and I now regard that as a mistake. I now, if were they to happen again, just as I do with the Ukraine, as much as I'm sitting here saying, yes, I would much rather the Ukraine reclaim their territory than that Russia sweep them off the map. I would much rather that the Ukraine reclaim their territory. I don't believe that this is Australia's fight, and I don't believe that we should be sending blood and treasure into that particular theatre. And I think if you need evidence as to why it's a terrible idea, have a look at Iraq, have a look at Ukraine, have a look at Korea, have a look at Vietnam. Have we not learned our lesson yet? What's happening in the upper echelons of the Australian government and Australian defence organisations, etc.? Is there amnesia about these past conflicts, or do they view them as some unrelated thing that you can't make that comparison?
Look, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what's happening in those upper echelons. I've never been privy to them. Suffice to say that Australia's made its position clear, and it's bipartisan in a sense, I suppose, that it supports the Ukraine and Ukrainian side of the fence, and that's part of where we sit on the map, I suppose, in terms of who we support and who we don't. And we follow America and all the rest of it. So why that is, I don't know, but I suspect that there's a whole host of trade, defence, and other reasons why we would do that. And
Sure.
Many would say moral reasons for doing that as well. But look, once again, I don't want to see Australians sent to fight and die. I don't know where that ends, but I've never been more uncomfortable with a period of time and conflict with this one. This one's got all the hallmarks of something that blows up into a lot more, and it strikes me that a lot more could be done to pull everyone away from the brink and stop the whole thing from escalating, which is the last thing anybody actually wants. The images coming out of all sides are tragic. Civilians, people getting hurt, people, soldiers on both sides. We don't want to see people getting killed. It's madness.
So enough of this trivial talk about meaningless things like war and nuclear weapons and things like that. Let's get to something much more serious. What's your take? As much as you're willing to share, but for anyone watching, these are all questions without notice. These are, and Senator Antic is very welcome to answer or not answer at his will. I find the Chinese situation very interesting, and let me preface this. I did a slow chat some months ago, maybe over a year ago, actually, with Dr. Paul Monk. Now, he was the former head of the China desk within the Defense Industry Organization. He was in charge of collating all of the intelligence that came in and forming a position and making recommendations, etc. He made the argument, which I personally found very persuasive, and I find myself now on his side on this, that China is much more divided internally than what it appears externally. And that in actual fact, avoiding conflict is going to be and allowing them to eventually reach their own resolution, which is probably going to involve the deposing of Xi Jinping, etc., is the smarter play than getting involved in any sort of a conflict. At the same time, we've watched them effectively annex Hong Kong. We're watching them saber rattling over Taiwan. What is your take on how we should best approach the whole China problem, as some people would like to call it?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's probably the preeminent question of our time, isn't it, really, in a sense? It probably drives everything we do. And it's amazing how far we've come on this. I mean, I'm reminded of probably back as late as 2015 or 16, where everybody in South Australia wanted to do business in China. Everyone wanted to sell wine and sell seafood and whatever, and that's good. I mean, no problem with that. We have no problem with the Chinese people, and they're good people, and we
trading wine is an awful lot better than trading bullets.
That's right. So we love all of that stuff, but the Chinese Communist Party is a bad organisation. It is a criminal organisation, and I agree. I don't have any interest in being friends with the CCP. That's for sure. So let's take it from that point of view. What does it look like? Well, we hear this all the time. What would happen if Taiwan are invaded? Which I think is almost inevitable in the sense. And what do we do about it? Do we stand with the United States in defence of Taiwan, or do we just let them fall to the ground while the Chinese military take over? I think we're seeing a little bit of that play out in our involvement with Ukraine now. And would we get dragged into it? We probably would. Should we? That's a more difficult question. Because once again, I get the arguments. I get the arguments about defending a similar-sized democracy in the Pacific, but we've got to look. It's got to be always about Australia first. So let's put it on that. So, but we probably would. Now, the issue is whether or not, in the case of a country like Australia, what do we do? What do we do about China, and what do we do from here? It's hard to know what we can do. I think you're absolutely right about this perception that there's division, and we've heard about it for a long time. We've heard about the Chinese economy being wobbly, which it appears to be. And the commentators that I read about China talk about it, and have been talking about it for a long period of time as well, about these banks. And we saw one recently went under and people couldn't get their money out. And so what did they do? They started cancelling people's green travel checks, so they couldn't go to the headquarters of the bank by train immediately. Perfect example of what we've been through over the last 2 years and how it can be weaponized against the population for reasons that aren't medical. We all saw it. People couldn't get, their protests started and people couldn't get to the town where the bank's headquarters was because they weren't allowed to travel because of COVID. And that continues. The same appears to be the case in terms of their leadership. People would have seen probably the footage of the previous leader, Hu Jintao, getting removed from the Politburo last week. Never properly explained. It looked like someone being ejected in a very deliberate sort of way. That's the way it appears to have been. But, it was also described as potentially a seniors moment because he's about 85 or something and, looked disorientated. But it didn't look like that to me. It looked very much like Xi making a very bold statement about, how in control he is, the sort of things you only do when you're under pressure. So, look, I don't know. Let's hope in a perfect world that the Chinese people do what they almost did in Tiananmen and get rid of this rotten regime. That might be fanciful. It might be fanciful in the next 5, 10, 20 years. Let's hope that we don't ever come to blows and that the people can do the work that they should behind the scenes.
I'm with you on that, and I took the time a few years ago, so my intel is a few years out of date, but I read a number of defense sort of papers, Australian and international, on the logistics of a war where China were attempting to take Taiwan. And I think it's far less one-sided than people assume that it is. People, there's a lot of parallels with Ukraine and Russia, to be honest. People line up their military side by side and say, well, obviously China's going to win. Well, hang on, China's got a lot more area to defend. They can't leave themselves defenseless on any of their borders because they know that there's likely to be an involvement from other countries in the event that they were to assault Taiwan. The logistics of the Taiwan Strait are far more difficult than I think most people give it credit for. And the simple reality is the number one takeaway that I took from that, and I believe would still remain 100% valid, is if there was going to be an invasion of Taiwan, we would see it coming for at least a few months because the buildup of arms and weapons and the appropriate means of getting people across that strait would be visible to Western intelligence for months before it actually happens. So I don't believe that it's imminent in that sense. We will see it coming months before it happens. And as a result, hopefully there will be other means, non-military means, brought to bear in the time beforehand. I certainly don't want to see the Pacific becoming a hot zone again anytime soon. If we could avoid that in my lifetime, that'd be great. Well, Senator, I just want to say thank you so much for your time. You've given us 2.5 hours of your precious time. I know you're a busy man. You've got a lot of people demanding a lot of your time. Is there anything before we go that we haven't covered that you would like to say, you'd like to leave us with as a thought or an encouragement or an exhortation? How do people contact you? How could they get involved? All of that is on the table.
Yeah, well, look, Topher, look, thanks for having me on. It's, as I said, it's a good opportunity to get and have a good long chat. We've only met a couple of times in passing, and it's good to actually sit down and do it in front of hundreds of people. Hopefully, thousands of people is an even better way. So start by just saying thanks for that. Look, I don't know. We've covered so much tonight. I guess we all come back to the same issue, though, which is people are worried, and I understand that, and probably feeling a bit powerless. But I want them to know that there's lots of things they can do to have a voice, in their community, whether it be at community level, as we've talked about, or in politics. I think people need to get involved. I just feel very strongly about that, and I really would encourage people, particularly people in South Australia who want to join me, inside my party, who share our party's values, to get in touch. Get in touch. Alex at believeinblue.com.au. I'm trying to encourage people, to inform them, to get them involved, and really try to encourage people to sort of either support those that share their values or become the person that goes to Parliament. There's nothing wrong with that. It's good politics. It's good policy. And, I just think that's what this country needs more of at the moment. And so, look, thanks for the opportunity to chat. Thanks for all the great work you're doing as well, and people around you, and to all the people watching tonight as well. Everyone out there, I'm sure there's people there that, have spent so much time talking to their friends and families, and just, remember that, you're all out there spreading the message as well. The more people out there that are sort of talking sensible politics, not the sort of nonsense that we hear from the commentariat and half of politicians, but the real stuff, the better we're going to be. So just keep going and keep talking.
Well, thank you so much, Alex. All the best with your continued work. I look forward to seeing. So make sure you follow Alex Antic MP, or Senator Alex Antic, I think it is. Facebook, Twitter. What other platforms are you on?
No, not Twitter yet. We're actually working on a few more. I've decided I've got to get out there and get onto more platforms. So we're working on that at the moment. The other one I've got is Getter, which is a really good one. So, but a very small one. So we're going to try and build some platforms into other things. And if people want to, get involved and get on the mailing list, they can find that at alexantic.com.au. There's a different mailing list there, and they can find and sign up in there, and we'll stay in touch that way as well. So all of the above.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Janine. Keep trying. Email Alex to join the Liberal Party in South Australia. I'm hearing from non-Liberal Party people that what Alex is doing and what's happening with the Liberal Party in South Australia is really encouraging. So do make sure that you follow up with Alex directly and make that happen. Thank you, Kerry. Thank you to everyone who's watched. Thank you to everyone who's commented. Really appreciate it. I'll be back on Thursday night. So this was an extra slow chat. We're going to have some extras over the coming weeks before the Victorian election. This coming Thursday, I have Senator Jared Rennick, a colleague of Alex's. Excuse me.
A very good man.
Very good man. Looking forward to chatting with him about so much of what he's been doing, some of the Senate inquiries, etc. We're going to go deep into the weeds in all of that stuff. But Senator Alex Antic, you are a gentleman and a scholar. I'm deeply grateful for your time. To everyone watching, join me on Thursday night. Thank you so much.